Hello dear viewers, support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it, and also make sure you comment your thoughts. Now let's start the video. Bran lost. Bran never knew where he was or when, only that he was lost. The moment the Night King's blade struck him, he felt like a great wave of the ocean or the wall itself had toppled onto him. He was falling into places unknown, into realms he could not distinguish from dreams or reality. Sometimes he found himself in a state of the mind he could not explain. It was neither sleeping nor was it being awake, but both. Everything was out of control. His visions would take him from one place to the next, without him desiring to go willingly. As soon as he would adjust to one time and place, he would be jolted somewhere else. He couldn't remember how long he had been like this. Was this how he would spend the rest of his life, or worse, was he stuck in an eternity of this confusion, where every moment lived together simultaneously? He couldn't make sense of any of it. The visions were no longer like watching falling snowflakes. Now he was watching a blizzard, and stuck in the center. Bran watched the first men slaughter the children of the forest, and as the fighting was reached its height, he found himself watching the two enemies ally against the White Walkers. He stood in one of the towers of Harrenhal, as Balerion the Dread descended from the sky and unleashed the greatest dragon fire he had ever seen. When the flames surrounded him, Bran was in a different castle engulfed in flames. All around, people screamed as they burned alive. Then he was in a great hall, and in the center was a silver-haired man wearing a crown before an altar with several dragon eggs. It was the tragedy at Summerhall. Before the ceiling collapsed over King Aegon V, the ground beneath Bran gave in and he found himself falling out of a sky cell at the Eyrie. He passed through a blanket of clouds and instead of falling to the Vale, he fell with thousands of other men atop the wall as Viserion destroyed it during the battle against the dead. He felt the cold wind biting at his fingertips. Amidst all the screams, a lone raven called out and flew down after Bran. A three-eyed raven. It was diving straight for him. In his mind he could hear the raven's voice, that of a woman. Why do you continue to fall? Spread your wings and fly. Her words were easier said than done. With everything happening so fast, Bran had no time to focus. When the other men hit the ground and turned into pink mists, Bran fell through the snow like it was a layer of fresh powder. A wave of seawater rushed over Bran's feet at the edge of the shoreline. The sun was setting just as the moon was rising, and all around there were nothing but rocky plains. The moon's starting to race across the sky, and in mere second it had set and the sun rose again. The two celestial bodies kept rising and falling, faster and faster each time they went. Then the voices started to speak. Bran was all alone on the beach, but he felt as if an army was surrounding him. I wish you good fortune in the wars to come. Any man who must say I am the king is no true king. Stay too long, and you'll drown. Who can rule without wealth, or fear, or love? Everyone is mine to torment. The sounds were overwhelming. Bran fell to his knees and clasped at his ears, begging in his mind for something to make it all stop. The man who passes the sentence should swing the sword. After hearing the words Eddard Stark once said to him long ago, everything stopped. The voices, the sun and the moon, only the waves of the ocean continued to rise and crash. But tide began to quickly rise and Bran was now knee-deep in water. From the ocean's horizon, a great wave was coming like a charging Dothraki horde, only far more destructive. The waves instantly engulfed him. Yet he remained standing where he was, watching the water rush through him. Only when the sea tore the land beneath his feet was he swept by the waters and tossed side to side. He was slammed into the seabed and swallowed up. Bran was spat out of the earth onto a grassy hill. He lay on the ground, gasping for breath. But as fast as he arrived, he was on his feet like it had never happened. But the strain of everything drained him. He felt like he was fighting 10 battles at the same time. Then, for the first time, he found himself somewhere he could only describe as still. He looked around to see vast green hills and dozens of gatherings of trees. Then he began to recognize the landscape. He had seen this place before, many times. He was in the north, in Winterfell, though there was no castle. At the moment, the land which would once hold one of the greatest castles in the world was locked in a fierce hills lay covered in snow and two armies charged one another. On one side were tens of thousands of first men alongside hundreds of giants and children of the forest riding direwolves and wielding weapons of dragonglass. On the other side was the army of the dead and the White Walkers, more than Bran had ever seen. The moment the two forces met, a wolf's howl echoed throughout the land and the battle was already over. Only a few thousand living survived and pushed the dead back. Standing next to Bran was a man wielding a great sword that resembled ice, but the blade was regular iron. The man had long brown hair and a thick beard. He wore a bronze crown on his head, adorned with iron swords. He was a king of winter, a Stark. He raised his sword and the light of the sun gleamed off the blade, reflecting it over the whole valley. He spoke aloud with a booming voice like a dragon. "This is our victory. This is our world. Let men of ice and their wretched puppets know from this day until the end of time that this is where they were defeated. This is where we won. This is where winter fell." The men, giants, and children of the forest all cheered for the man. "Brandon! Brandon!" The next thing Bran knew, summer had returned to the lands, and the all-men and the giants were working to build Winterfell. The stone was newly shaped and clean of any erosion. The castle was paler in color than what Bran had grown up in, without choosing to be. Bran was in the Godswood of Winterfell, except there were no trees. It was all just a large patch of dirt. He could see Bran the Builder gathered with some of the children of the forest. One of them had a seed in her hand, and gently planted it into the ground. The children began to move and sing, while Brandon merely watched. The words of the children echoed on the air and rippled in the soil of the earth. Within moments a red leaf attached to a pale white stem sprouted from the ground where the seed was planted. The children ceased their singing, and the child who planted it turned to Brandon. Bran recognized her. "Leaf," he muttered under his voice. Leaf took hold of Brandon's hand and placed it over his chest. Her words of the common tongue were heavy with an accent of the old tongue. "Listen to the earth, listen to the water, listen to the trees. They will whisper of the man who conquered winter, the man who defeated death. They will sing their songs for you, Brandon Stark. They will remember you, and they will repay you." Brandon looked confused. "Repay me? This home of stone it shall be yours, even when you join the earth to sleep forever. You will remain here to watch over your blood. Your children, their children, and all of your blood after them shall watch over their kin, until the day comes that spring is lost. The Starks shall be forever." She smiled at him knowingly, but then her head turned slowly, and she was now looking directly at Bran. In fact, all of the children were, their gazes pierced right into him. Bran didn't say anything, he felt too afraid. He took a step back and felt a hand wrap around his ankle and pull him down into the ground. Bran sank down quickly and fell into a cave. He once knew. The weirwood roots and moss had covered every inch of the walls and ground. The only thing missing was the three-eyed raven before him. Brandon Rivers. The roots that entangled him were empty, and there wasn't a single trace of him or any of those that died that night. One thing was for certain, though. He felt calm and at peace. The strain on his mind was fading away, and he finally felt he had some time to gather himself. From one of the tunnels, the three-eyed raven from the wall flew in and perched itself on one of the roots low to the ground. It fluttered its feathers and stared up at Bran. It cawed out to him and took flight once more. Circling around in the cave, it flew behind the weirwood roots and didn't appear on the other side. Bran walked around them but saw no trace of the bird. Instead, appearing from behind the roots was a woman. She looked just a few years older than him. She had short curly brown hair and a freckled face. Her eyes were hazel brown and she had a comforting smile about her. She wore a long black dress with a mantle over her shoulders of silver wolf fur. Flowing down her back like water was a thick black cloak. Brandon recognized her, and at the same time he did. Something about this woman calmed him. "Who are you?" She snorted at him and slowly walked towards him, her movements gilded with grace. "I would have thought the raven would have given me away." A northern accent was present in her voice. For being a three-eyed raven, she had a pleasant mood about her. "I assumed what you were, but who are you?" She stood face to face with him. "You can call me Winter Lily, and I'm here to help you get out of this pandemonium you're trapped in. How else do you think you've stayed in one place for as long as you have now?" Bran hadn't paid attention to that until now. Ever since entering this state, he had been going from one place in time to another. But now he was at a moment that he could stay at. "You're doing this. I had a wonderful teacher. Then can you wake me up?" Winter Lily's eyes fell to the ground, but she kept herself smiling. Only you can do that. But first, you have to find something you lost. She held a small hand out to him. Come, let me show you what you have missed in your sleep. Bran looked down to her hand and back to her. She was always smiling at him, and he didn't understand why. Regardless, he took her hand, and the two of them were taken from the cave to the north. They were in the army's encampment along the King's Road. 3 days from Winterfell, the sky was clear and the fresh snow lit the world like an early from the cold light of the full moon. In the distance, a lone wolf could be heard howling into the night. Winter Lily's smile grew. He's getting closer. Who? You'll see. Come, walk with me. She guided him into the camps. Her dress flowed with the winds and reflected the moonlight like the surface of water. They came to the inside of Sansa's tent. She was sitting at her bed while Arya was seated in a chair. No, Arya exclaimed. I am not wearing a damn dress. Arya, please? Sansa begged. It will only be for one night, and making clothes is one of my strengths. You'll look beautiful. Bran became confused. A dress? What for? Winter Lily pointed back to Arya and Sansa, meaning to wait and listen. Sansa, I don't want to. I don't like being prettied up. I'm a fighter, not a lady. Arya looked disappointed in herself, more than she was irritated at Sansa. I don't feel ready for this. I think I acted too rash, just like in River Run. Arya stared at her left arm. Sansa sighed as she got up from the bed and kneeled down to Arya. Arya, from what I've experienced, marriage is a different battle on its own, and from what I've seen between you and Gendry, no woman except you deserves him, and no man except him deserves you. Arya smiled lightly at her sister and took a deep breath. If it's for one night, then I'll wear the damn white dress. If it will make you feel better, I'll make a pair of breeches to go with it. Arya began to giggle uncontrollably, as did Sansa. Bran couldn't believe what he heard. Arya, getting married? Aye, Winter Lily confirmed. The union Robert Baratheon wanted is underway. A son of Baratheon blood and a daughter of Stark blood. Bran and Winter Lily were now walking close behind the northern guards, escorting Rickon and 2 other men in plate armor from the waist up, escorting Jon. You remember what to say? Jon asked. Yes, Jon. I've been practicing the lordly customs and courtesies. Sansa has been training me more than Ange did with archery. Jon chuckled. Well, she is the best person to learn from, but if courtesies were left in the south, I think you already have all the makings to be the next Lord of Winterfell. Rickon slowed his pace. I never imagined I would become the one to inherit our home. Jon stopped walking, and everyone did. He turned to the guards. Could you give us a moment? The guards nodded respectfully, and spread out far enough to give Jon and Rickon some privacy. Jon stood face to face with Rickon. I understand if you're nervous, even more so if you're afraid. But remember that father wasn't meant to rule Winterfell either. Uncle Brandon was. He was the one brought up to be lord, but then he died and father had to take on the duties. He taught me and Robb everything I taught you. Rickon shook his head. It's not that, I miss him. Father, mother, Robb, I miss everyone. They should have been here, but they all went south and never came back. Rickon looked up to Jon. I don't want you to go south and never come back. It's not where we belong. Jon knelt down to Rickon. I am a Stark, but I'm also a Targaryen, and no words of bad luck will keep me from coming home. Rickon hugged Jon tightly, and Jon returned it. Without realizing it, the Brain and Winter Lily were inside one of the command tents, seated around table, were Tyrion Lannister, Robert Glover, Roderick Forrester, Gwyn and Torrhen Whitehill, and Lyanna Mormont. At the head was Rickon and across from him was Jon. Behind both of them were 2 guards standing by. Bran recognized the 2 men behind Jon as the men from the Golden Company, Will Cole and Laramus Mudd. Both of them wore fresh forged armor, with the Targaryen sigil below the collar of the breastplate. What are those 2 doing here? Bran asked. It is the duty of the Kingsguard to guard the king, is it not? Winter Lily told him. They offered their swords to the king and queen, and were granted positions for their valor in battle and loyalty to the Targaryens. For now, Ser Jorah is serving as Lord Commander. For now? Bran asked. Winter Lily's eyes widened. Shit, they're about to begin. Bran noticed a hint of gloom in her eyes. She knew something, but obviously wouldn't say what. Jon was addressing them all. My lords, my ladies, as much as we all want to deny it, the North is reaching the point of weakening greater than ever. Our fighting strength is less than 10,000 men, and our food stores may not last through the winter, even with the food the Lords of the Reach provided for the battle. Lord Forrester spoke up. I'm assuming you have a solution, Your Grace. Tyrion was now addressing the Lords of the North. As you may have heard already, young Rickon Stark has agreed to take up the position of Lord of Winterfell and Warden of the North. Most of those who sat at the table nodded in agreement pridefully, but with very little experience and his house still rebuilding, we have asked him to choose those who he needs help. Tyrion nodded to Rickon, who stood up from his seat at the table. Lord Glover, you are one of the few men of the North who know it more than anyone, and a well-experienced battle commander. In the forthcoming days, I would ask for your counsel and wisdom to strengthen the North. Rebet Glover nodded. It would be my honor, my lord. Lady Mormont, you have as much of a strong rule as every other lord in the North. I would ask that you give counsel to me on how to rule fairly and just. Lyanna smirked at him. I will do what I can to help House Stark return to its strength. Jon, Rickon, and Tyrion all looked pleased. Jon spoke up. Thank you, Lord Glover, Lady Mormont. These positions will be considered a great honor and service to both House Stark and the Crown. Tonight you shall both provide what you have been asked of. Lord Glover looked a bit confused. How so, Your Grace? Jon nodded to Tyrion. The King and Queen and I have gone over a few ideas to help bring back the lost strength of the North, and at the same time establish strong relations with the free folk. Lord Glover, I believe you were told of the proposal to raise House Forrester allegiance to House Stark. Aye, I was. The White Hills will take their place, serving under my house. Torrhen Whitehill, a man of cold blonde hair, spoke. His eyes almost as cold as Roose Bolton's, but a certain calmness resided in them. There isn't much of our house left, Your Grace. He spoke with harshness in his voice. My father was a fuck-up who nearly brought it to ruin, and Griff was a fool who got killed by him. He pointed to Roderick Forrester. We have less than 100 men left. Any resistance we try to stage will be met with the extinction of our house, so we have no choice but to accept. Lyanna spoke up with her fierce tone. You make it sound like you were already planning a rebellion. I can assure you that as long as a Stark is in Winterfell, no house in the North will ever hope to challenge them. Winter will always come for those who do. Jon looked at Torrhen firmly. There is always a choice, and your father and brother chose to desecrate Ironrath and House Forrester. Ramsay Bolton killed Ethan Forrester, but Griff Whitehill killed Asher. Not before Asher killed 9 of his men. Roderick intruded. A smirk hinted on his mouth. Jon shot him a look, and Roderick settled down. They paid the price, as did the men who fought for them. We can't keep letting old grudges destroy us again and again, or is the North to suffer as House Martell has, with endless vengeance? Gwen Whitehill spoke calmly, but hurt. And what is it you propose? I tried to bring peace between our two houses, but the Forresters just kept rebelling. Enough! Jon slammed his fist on the table. Gwen was upset but kept a calm complexion. After a few moments to take a breather, Jon resumed. To start the beginning of the end of the conflict between the two houses, Lord Tyrion has suggested a proposal of marriage between Lady Gwen and a man of Forrester blood. A man? Gwen said. Roderick is already married, and the next male heir is Ryan, a boy of 12. They aren't talking about Rand, Roderick informed. They're talking about my bastard brother, Josera Snow. Jon nodded. I've spoken with Josera, and he has agreed to take a position as a lord. He will be naturalized, and has chosen the name Icewood. He will be given the Dreadfort, but the lands it holds will be reduced and divided to the other lords. His house's status will be a lesser house serving under House Forrester. Gwyn looked to Roderick, then back to Jon, and if I say no, Tyrion sighed. Then you won't marry him and live out your days as you choose. But you shall remember that there a chance to bury the conflicts between the families, and it was passed by. There was a pregnant silence before Gwyn took in a deep breath and sighed. I'll do it. For the sake of my family, I will do it. Torrhen clenched his fist. Is this our punishment? High Point will see another Whitehill leave its halls, never to return. Tyrion, Gwyn said, just don't. Tyrion was angry, but he listened to his sister. She was younger, but she clearly had more of a governing authority. Everyone looked at each other and let things sink in. Thank you for accepting this, Lady Gwen. I understand if you hold discontent towards us for asking this. However, if you were to take advice from me, I would try and get to know Cersei before we reach Winterfell. Is that when we'll be wed? A few days after we all settle in. You, Cersei, and then 4 more weddings in one night. Rickon's eyes widened. 5 weddings in one night? Aye, Gwenn and Cersei, Arya and Gendry, and the other 3 are the other reason we asked you here, Lord Glover. Your Grace, Lord Glover asked. Tyrion spoke up. As Lord Rickon mentioned, you have knowledge of the North politically and strategically. The North needs to strengthen itself in all directions, and we would ask of your counsel. My counsel for what, Lord Tyrion? He spoke to Tyrion as Torrhen did to Jon. Which castles could use lords in them once again? Aethys Karstark has agreed to be wed to Septon, and will take a new name. However, she will remain governing over Carhold until her baby brother comes of age. But when he does, she and her husband and their children, should they have any by then, will have need of some place to live. Wouldn't you agree? Robert glared at Tyrion. You arranged for Lady Karstark to be wed to a wildling? We did, Jon told him, as well as Winifred Manderly and Rose Ricewell. All of them agreed to do this of their own will. Even Rickon has made the choice to take one for a wife when he is of age. Steal one. Rickon corrected. Jon and Tyrion were the only ones amused at that. All of them are marrying wildlings. Lord Glover locked eyes with Jon. I didn't follow you into battle because you led an army of wildlings. I doubted your leadership because you treated with wildlings. I didn't trust having 2,000 foreigners taking the black, and do you know what? Everyone held their breaths. I have been proven wrong every time. He looked defeated, but in a good way for him, as if he was finally understanding humility. If Rose Ricewell is to be given his own lordship, I would suggest giving him a position to strengthen the rills near the shore. They could become a line of defense for Torrhen's Square. Lady Winifred and her betrothed. Morgan of the Frozen Shoremen. Tyrion informed. They should reside in Old Castle to support her grandfather and strengthen our navy. As for Lady Karstark, a place on her family's lands would be ideal, but there are fewer houses in the west and lands untouched and rich for settling. The lands may be rich, but it will take too long to settle. Jon informed. Almost all the castle are in ruin, and the winters there are worse than they are in the east. What about the Cold Hill Fortress? Jon suggested. Cold Hill? Tyrion inquired. I'm afraid I do not know of that castle. Lord Glover explained. It's the castle that belonged to the ancient House Frost before they were wiped out by the Kings of Winter. It rests between the Grey Hills and the forest that surrounds Carhold. There are copper mines that were abandoned as well. Abandoned? What for? Tyrion asked. No one gave reply. In fact, they all looked dumbfounded. Doesn't anyone know the reason? Again, no one gave any reply. You mean to tell me that there are mines that have gone untouched for centuries? No, thousands of years. Tyrion was astonished at them all. He puffed out and slumped back in his chair. Why is there never wine when you need it? Winterlily chuckled. It's not just the copper mines. There are many rich resources in the north. Forgotten as time went on. Bran shrugged. The Northerners always valued keeping the land as a home rather than a place of profits and value. Bran flinched when he suddenly heard the howling wolf again, but this time it sounded like it was just outside the tent. There was something about the echo and the tone of the wolf's voice that resonated with something inside of Bran. Strangely, no one else but him was reacting to it. What is that? He went to step outside of the tent. Bran, wait! Winterlily called out to him, but he already set foot outside the tent and was already somewhere else. Bran stood on a rocky ledge, looking down into the heart of a volcano. Hot air passed through him and brushed his hair back furiously. The lava was acting violently, and there were constant blasts of it shooting high into the air. The molten rock was constantly changing its hot color from red to yellow as it shifted and turned. Close to Bran's position was a ceremonial platform carved into the stone. Surrounding it were 3 stone dragons. On the platform were a dozen men, wearing elegant robes and chanting in High Valyrian. One of them was in the center, and he held his arms above his head. A red light began to shine in the space between his hands, and it grew to the size of an apple. The man fell to his knees and slammed the orb of light at the black stone floor, and the light rippled all throughout the volcano. The lava began to calm down and settle as the light flowed over it. But without warning, everything became much worse. The The lava was now rising, and the very foundations of the volcano shook. The platform cracked and split from the mountain. All of the men screamed as they were consumed by the lava. The volcano was on the verge of erupting before Bran was taken somewhere new. He was in the middle of a field of dry grass on the eve of morning. Frost formed at the tips of the grass blades. There was no sound of it crunching under his feet, nor did he feel the trickling cold. There were hills and mountains around him, covered in light patches of snow, and from his intuition and abilities, he knew he was near the Red Mountains in Dorne. From out of nowhere behind him, a squad of horses with riders galloped past him, and soon they were followed by an army. He saw many of the riders flying banners, ones that he recognized, the Company of the Cat, the Long Lances, the Jolly Fellows, and the Ragged Standard. Grenn did not remember any time in history that these sellsword companies were ever in Westeros. This has to be very recent. They had to be under Cersei's employ. The direction they were headed for was east, towards the coast. Where are they going? Bran thought. On a nearby hill was a dead tree with a dozen ravens perched on the branches. He warged into the flock and took to the skies, reaching high enough to see the valley around for miles. On the edge of the horizon were the shores of Dorne, and a small white speck was resting on the border of the sea and the land. The flock passed the horses, and the speck grew into a castle, a pale castle, with purple banners housing a shooting star crossing a white sword. House Dane, that's Castle Starfall. The sellswords were hidden by a hill and still too far away to be noticed by anyone on watch duty in the castle. Cersei's begun her attack, Jon needs to know. But how could he tell anyone? He couldn't control where he went or reach anyone besides the children of the forest, it seemed. Rickon has the sight, I need to show him. Bran used every ounce of his power and mind to take himself to Rickon. It didn't matter where he was, as long as he could go to sometime when they came home. Bran felt something rush through him, and he was standing in a tent, filled with children. All of them were sound asleep. Sitting back against a nightstand with a girl resting on his shoulder was Rickon. He was beginning to wake up, but Bran felt himself starting to slip away from where he was. He had to act now. He locked eyes with his little brother just before he swooped down and touched his face with his hand. He felt himself pulled back into Dorne, and Rickon was warged into one of the ravens. Bran could feel himself relieved, but it disappeared when the horsemen arrived and began their attack. By the time the castle had seen the army, Bran heard the howling wolf again, and he was taken back into the cave of the three-eyed raven. He fell to the ground and felt a pain in his back. He started to stand up, but his legs wouldn't move. He couldn't feel them. No, he tried to shift and turn so that he would feel them again, but it was to no avail. No. He started to panic before he felt a hand rest on his shoulder. He turned and saw Winter Lily kneeling beside him. It's all right, she told him. This was going to happen eventually. Eventually, Bran asked, anger present in his tone. Winter Lily placed her hand on his leg, and a sudden warmth entered Bran's body. His legs twitched before they jerked from his movements. He sighed out as he got to his feet. What's happening to me? Your mind is losing track of what is the sight and what is real. Your legs will give out before you start to become lost forever. She stood up and faced him. But that won't happen as long as you stay with me. Bran wanted to feel afraid, concerned, everything he could to be panicking right now, but he felt nothing. I heard a wolf howling again. It's how I found you. What is it? I've been hearing it ever since I was trapped in the sight. It's something you lost. If I tell you, you'll never find it. But if you find it as you are now, you can never regain it. This was making no sense. But rather than questioning what Winter Lily meant, Bran was questioning who she was over and over again in his mind. Winter Lily smiled at him. I promise I'll tell you everything, but if I am going to, you need to listen. Not to me, but to yourself. To the things you want to feel, but can't. She held her hand out to him. Bran looked at her into her eyes and saw a familiarity in them, but he was not sure where he recognized them. He took her hand, and both of them were taken back to the camps. It was the same evening that they were just at, only later into the night. Bran followed Winter Lily beyond the camps, their steps not leaving a single print in the snow. They were approaching where the dragons had taken to nest. All three of them were huddled together in a large circle. In the center, wrapped in extra thick furs and leaning back on Drogon, was Jon and Daenerys. Her belly was much bigger than it was at the battle, so big there was no way she could ride the dragons anymore. Clutched in each of their arms was a dragon egg. Daenerys held the red one Cersei brought to them, and Jon held a grey one Bran had never seen yet. Winter Lily stopped Bran as they got close enough. In just over a month, the queen will give birth to the next Targaryens, Aemon and Matthias, Bran stated. He stood with Winter Lily in silence, and listened to Jon singing to Daenerys, his children and the dragons. His words seemed to echo in the night. Though the winds of winter blow, they will never scare the crow. Never shall we knock death's door. For the lands above will soar. When the king came striking down, our steel did break his crown. His touch turned all to ice. In the snows was his demise. And then the skies did fill with light. Our brothers have won the fight. The fires of the dawn did come, and the colds of winter undone. Then the one who was lost shall win, and the greatest of ages shall begin. When all finds peace in the end, the world forever will defend. The wolves will howl and the dragons cry. Through fire and ice together we'll fly. Daenerys nestled her head on Jon's shoulder and let the words soothe into her soul. I can feel them, Jon. I can feel our sons listening. Do they like it? Yes, they do. Bran started to feel a flutter of envy, spur inside of him and a weight over his heart. He felt sad, or rather, he was starting to feel something again. He felt a tear trickle down his cheek, and was quick to wipe it away. Winter Lily noticed this. What's wrong? I don't know, I don't remember what this feeling means. He tried to focus on the memories he had as Bran Stark, and the times he had felt like this. He felt this way when he had to focus on his studies while Rickon played with Shaggy Dog and Summer. At that point he'd no longer been able to walk, so there was no point for him to learn archery or how to fight. I will never be able to have a moment like this in my life. I traded all chances of it happening when he became the three-eyed raven. Instead of showing any sign of concern or sympathy, she smiled happily at him. And yet here you are, feeling jealousy and sadness. She turned to face him. But how do I feel more? How do I be Brandon Stark when I can see every moment of everything happening all at once? There's so much to see. How do I focus on being what I was? Learn to close your eyes to it all. She held her hand out to him once again. Close your eyes, she whispered. Bran let his eyelids weigh down like the fatigue of well-deserved rest. What do you want to see? What did he want to see? What does he need to see? The war for the dead was over. But the war with Cersei had yet to begin. Starfall was attacked. Who knows what other castles were as well. He should find a time and place that is vital to winning the war. But there was a part of him that didn't want to think about that. A part of him that desired something else. Something for him. Mira, he whispered. Bran felt Winter Lily take his hand. Open your eyes. When Bran opened his eyes, he found himself in his room at Winterfell. He was lying on his bed as limp and silent as he was after his fall. His face had gone unshaved for a few days, and he had a few whiskers sprouting all along his chin. But grasping him hand was Mira. She was sitting at his bedside and wearing a formal dress, something Bran would have never imagined her wearing. There was a knock on the door shortly before it opened and Howland Reed walked in. Bran was starting to become very confused. When is this? The right place and the right time, 2 weeks after what we just saw. Winter Lily's smile disappeared, and she motioned for Bran to go to Mira. Bran walked over and stood behind Mira, watching her watch him. Her head was fallen down like she was asleep, but Bran knew she wasn't. Bran, Mira said. Bran gasped when she said his name, thinking maybe she knew he was here, but her words were to the sleeping body on the bed. She lifted her head up and looked down at him. I don't know if you can hear me. Maybe if you wake up you'll see this happen. If you do, I want you to know that this is the moment I say goodbye. For a second, Bran felt a pain in his heart, unlike any he ever felt. I'm going home to Greywater in a few days. I've accepted who you are. I guess I wasn't just ready to when I left you here the first time. I wanted to say something to you, but I couldn't bear to after realizing that you're not who I brought to that cave. Now if I say it, I'll be looking back for the rest of my days, and I can't let myself do that. She leaned forward and planted a light kiss on his forehead. Goodbye, Bran. She got up from her chair and swiftly left the room. Mira. Bran started to walk after her, but Winter Lily grabbed his arm. You can't leave, or else you'll be thrown back into the chaos of the site. Bran looked at her, then back to the doorway. He wanted to ignore her, he wanted to run, he wanted to shout, so he did. Bran tore his arm out of Winter Lily's grip and ran after Mera, calling out her name. Bran was right behind her, and reached out to touch her. The moment before his finger touched her hair, he heard the wolf howling again. This time it sounded right behind him. Bran fell through the floor and was back inside the cave. He looked all around him and saw Winter Lily, standing before him and smiling more than she ever did. "Well done," she said. "No! Take me back. I have to see her." A familiar voice spoke from behind Bran. "You can't go back." This voice was one Bran knew all too well. It was his voice. He turned around and saw himself crawling on the floor of the cave. "Not yet, Jon." Jon stood at the base of the weirwood, waiting to conduct the last wedding for the night, and the one he would be most proud of. It had been snowing lightly, all throughout the night, as the 4 others had happened. First was Rose Risewell and a spearwife named Gletta of the cave people. Once the face paint and other messes had been washed off of her, she was fairer than most in the south, with hair as black as the midnight sky. After him was Gwyn Whitehill and Josera Snow, now Lord and Lady of House Icewood of the Winterfort, no longer named the Dreadfort. Josera was stricken with Gwyn, yet she remained cold as stone, much like Lady Catelyn was, towards Jon. Then it was Winifred Manderley, and Morgan of the Frozen Shoremen. Together they wed and began House Frostshore. After them it was Alice Karstark and Segun of the Thenns. He was years older than her, but no more than 8. Little did any of the other lords know that Alice and Segun planned to be wed before Tyrion could think of it. Segun would create the house then, and the both of them would rule in Carhold for 5 years. Hopefully by then, Rickard II Karstark would be old enough to learn from his mother and advisors. All of the free folk were welcome to marry at the Godswood, seeing as they were just as faithful to the old gods as the Northerners were. The men were told of bedding ceremonies beforehand. Morgan and Segun threatened to kill any man who dare touch their brides. So as a gesture of good faith, the men were welcome to steal their wives when the time came. Finally, the last of the weddings was about to begin. Daenerys stood next to Nasandi, and Brienne to watch on the bride's side of the onlookers, while Tyrion, in front of Sandor Clegane, both of whom were behind Sara Davos, who was behind Gendry. He was dressed in a fine black doublet with his sigil, a stag's head over an anvil, sewn in gold over his left breast. His beard was finely trimmed, and he looked groomed to look like the lord he had to be. It was surprising to many that Gendry managed to get himself clean, after spending over a week in the forge with 12 other smiths. All of them had been working day and night on a special project that no one knew about. However, Jon suspected that Daenerys knew because the day of their return to Winterfell, Gendry had a private meeting with her, and she had been keeping something to herself ever since. All went silent, as Rickon walked into the Godswood with Arya, holding onto his arm. Jon wasn't prepared to see Arya in a beautiful white wedding dress. She was groomed to be like a lady like her mother wanted, and for probably the only time it would happen, Arya looked happy about it. Jon straightened when Rickon and Arya reached the foot of the heart tree. The lantern's light was reflecting the red of the leaves and made them look like rubies flickering in the night. Jon stepped forward and began the ceremony. "Who comes before the old gods this night?" Rickon began his part. "Arya, of House Stark, comes here to be wed, a woman grown, true-born, and noble. She comes to beg the blessing of the gods, who comes to claim her." Arya shifted slightly and looked slightly unsettled. She still didn't have the amount of comfort doing this as she thought she would. Gendry looked at her and noticed her discomfort. He stepped forward and did as he was instructed, but only he decided to word things different. "Gendry of House Baratheon, Lord of Storm's End. I've not come to claim her, but take her of her own free will." Davos and Tyrion's eyes widened in either shock or amazement, maybe both. Jon kept his composure, but felt as they did. He'd never heard of this before, and felt a sort of satisfaction that he would do that for Arya. She looked at him, her discomfort fading away. She wasn't sure how to proceed, and neither did Jon, but she decided to go with it. "My choice is to be his, from now until always." Gendry smiled, the slightest, and looked back to Jon. "Who gives her?" Rickon looked more relieved than anyone. This was his first time to give away a bride, and he looked more nervous than he did when he wed Jon to Daenerys. "Rickon of House Stark, Lord of Winterfell and Warden of the North, her brother." Even though Arya had already given her answer, Jon proceeded, "Lady Arya, Arya's face twitched when Jon called her a lady. Do you take this man? She looked at Gendry and tried not to smile, but she failed. I take this man, and with those words. Arya Stark was now Arya Baratheon. The night was ripe for celebration. However, given the size of the Great Hall in Winterfell, the lords and ladies were taken to the longhouse built for the War Council, as to fit the number of them gathering together. To accommodate the celebrations of the great victory and the 5 weddings, 2 high tables were built, one for the king and queen and the Starks of Winterfell, the other for those who were married. Jon and Daenerys' places were in the middle of the longhouse, the Starks to their left, and the married few on the right. Decorating the walls were the banners of every house that fought, including the new banners for the new northern houses. House Icewood's sigil sported a white snow bear resting between 2 ironwood trees on a pale blue field. Roose Ryswell's took his own form of his family's sigil. The colors of the Ryswell horse were reversed, and the eyes of the red horse were turned to green after his own. House Rysfer took a blue and gray whale in a cold green sea. Sigurd remained loyal to his people, and made his analysis sigil a bronze disc of the Thenns. Sigurd had been taken with the ideals of the Lord of Light ever since Jon's second resurrection, and chose to add the red flames of the Ryswaller around the disc, honoring the Red God, the power of the dragons, and the sigil of House Karstark. Once everyone had settled in, Jon and Daenerys both stood up from their seats with silver goblets in hand filled with a simple wine. All who were present in the longhouse stood up with them, goblets and tankards in hand. Jon spoke loudly and his voice echoed to all of them. As we begin to rejoice in our victory, we raise a glass to those who gave their blood and their lives. Hail the victorious dead! All in the longhouse repeated after him. Hail the victorious dead! Everyone took a drink of their wine in honor of the dead, the last rite they had to do for those that fell. Once everyone had set down their drinks, Jon nodded to a group of minstrels, and Hay began to play music loud for all to hear. Though the occasion was considered a feast, the food was nothing more than the nightly rations, with a few extra servings of game that was hunted in the week, since everyone's return. The armies were treated to a few extra barrels of ale and wine. But for once, maybe the only time ever, the Northmen hardly had any. There was still a great distrust of the Lannister forces and those that previously served House Frey, so many kept their distance and made sure they were armed for tonight's weddings. As things began to get started, many friends and family members of the newlyweds began to present them with wedding gifts. Josera was given an ironwood shield from Roderick. Lord Manderley had 3 ships made for Winifred and Morgan. Even Rose's wife Gletta presented him with a stone that rippled like a rainbow from her cave in the far north. But to Jon and Daenerys' surprise, many lords began to line up to them. The room started to settle down as many stepped forward. Roderick Forrester was at the head of the line. My king, my queen, as your wedding was one that we had hardly any time to prepare for. There are many of us who had yet to present gifts to you both. And now with the victory over the dead, we can only offer so much for everything you've done. Roderick nodded to some of his men who left the building, but came back with 2 cribs made of ironwood. In the sides were carvings of dragons and dire wolves. Daenerys was nearly moved to tears, seeing them. Underneath the table she held Jon's hand tightly. Many of the gifts presented were meant for their children. Sansa presented Daenerys with some clothes she stitched for each of them. Some had dragons and some had dire wolves. But once Lord Edmure took his turn, the gifts began to shift to Jon and Daenerys directly. Your Graces, I have been discussing tactics with my fellow lords of the Riverlands, and given what we know about Cersei Lannister's plan in King's Landing, there could still be a chance we lose the city. He cleared his throat after the dull reminder. Given that the Red Keep would also be destroyed, you would be in need of a castle, somewhere at the center of Westeros. So I would give you the castle of Harrenhal and the lands it holds. There was a great murmuring from all the guests. Even though Harrenhal was in a ruin, it was still a mighty fortress, one of the greatest in the world. When the war is over, I and many of the lords have arranged for the castle's repair to its former glory. Lord Edmure, Jon said, you honor us, but surely such a place too valuable to simply give. Edmure smirked at him. This is all only meant if the Red Keep should fall. But Harrenhal has been the home to near a dozen lords, all of whom failed to keep a hold over it. Harrenhal is a place not meant for any lord or lady, but a king and queen. Jon looked at Daenerys, and she seemed to not have any issue with such a thing. And if King's Landing is destroyed, the lands would be defiled by the wildfire. People would need a new place to settle, and the area around Harrenhal was vast and rich, as far as Jon knew. And the Blackwater Rush did fork into the God's Eye Lake, making it perfect for ships to port. Maybe Edmure was right. It's a place meant for kings and queens. Thank you, Lord Edmure. Even if the Red Keep should remain standing, we'll be sure to remember the generosity you have given the Queen and I. Edmure bowed to both of them before his wife, Rosalind, stepped forward and bowed to her knees. My king, she spoke softly, and with a tone of fear in her voice. My family dishonored the Starks by breaking the guest right. They killed King Robb and Lady Catelyn and dishonored their bodies. But my father kept something as a trophy, something that belongs in Winterfell. She held the box out in front of her. Inside is the skull of Robb Stark, the king in the north, the only remnants of his body. Jon froze, as did Sansa, Arya, and Rickon, when they heard about the contents of the box. Jon stood up from his seat and stepped down from his table. Rosalind looked absolutely terrified, but Jon calmly took the box from her and opened it. There was white skull inside, and though there was no skin or face or hair, Jon knew in his heart that this was Robb's. He gently closed the lid and knelt down to Rosalind. I can't thank you enough for returning his remains, Rosalind, and you have no reason to be afraid. You had no part in Robb's death. Rosalind looked up to Jon, relieved and faintly smiling. She rose up with him. Thank you for your mercy, your grace. Edmure led her away from Jon as soon as he returned to his seat next to Daenerys. One of the servants took the box from Jon to be placed in his room until the time was right to place it in Robb's tomb in the crypts. Edric Dane approached Jon and Daenerys after Ralston. He too held a box in his hands. My king, my queen, if I recall, I lost a duel and a wager. So as promised, Edric opened the box and revealed a crown adorned with many fine rubies, the crown of Aegon, the Conqueror. Many of the lords were marveled when they saw light flickering from the rubies and the Valyrian steel. Jon never imagined it to look as beautiful as it did. The ripples of the steel made a pattern like fire, and the rubies were as red as ghosts' eyes. The fittings that held the jewels were carefully shaped into dragon claws. Edric stepped forward and brought the crown up to the both of them, but Daenerys was the one intrigued by it the most. She took it out of the box and held it delicately like she would. The dragon eggs, the crown worn by our ancestors, she spoke. The crown of the dragons. She set it back into the box. Lord Edric, you are an honorable man for returning this artifact of our house back to us. We shall not forget it. Edric bowed his head and gave the box to another one of the servants. After him was Gendry, and he had a large grin about his face. I don't mean to make this a competition of who gives the best gift, but mine will speak for themselves. One of his men was behind him, with a subject covered by a cloth. With the help of the Umber Smiths and 4 straight days of work, we have created a sword worthy of you. Gendry grabbed onto the cloth and tore it away, revealing the best sword Jon had ever seen. He got out of his seat, eager to see his new weapon. At first he thought it was a recreation of Longclaw, given that the pommel was a white direwolf with ruby eyes, but at closer look, the pommel looked more fearsome and less of a wet wolf. There was more than what he noticed. The guard was shaped into 2 dragons, their heads made the ends of it, and their wings intertwined and made a rise, and in the center was a small gem of dragon glass. The handle was no longer black, but white. The wood was of a weirwood tree. 2/3 down the handle, just below the pommel, was a metal ring with a dragon and a direwolf. Wrapped in a spiral down the wood of the handle was a single black chain. The hilt is beautiful, but it pales in comparison to the blade. Gendry took the sword and held the handle to Jon. Jon felt the excitement he once did when he first drew Longclaw from its scabbard, and his brothers of the Watch chanting sword, sword, sword. Jon pulled the blade out of the scabbard and listened to the metal sing out as a pure black blade emerged. There was a moment of bewilderment before everyone around was in awe. In the fuller was a Valyrian star pattern, but the heart of the stars were like pure silver. But as Jon held it in his fingers, there was something amidst his feelings that didn't feel right. A new sword that had yet to spill blood. Jon couldn't help but feel morose when he thought how many would die by this sword's blade. Before Jon could express his gratitude, Gendry motioned for another one of his men forward, who had another object wrapped in cloth. And with the efforts of 12 smiths after teaching them how to work Valyrian steel, 8 days of work, and trusting in a hunch. We made this. Gendry pulled the cloth off and revealed something no one would have dreamed of seeing in this day and age. Dazzling in the light of the pit fire was a breastplate decorated specifically for Jon, and it was made entirely of Valyrian steel. There was a great many of inlays in the armor that bordered two direwolf heads facing inwards at the belly. Between the heads was a tail that was part of a three-headed dragon, flying up above the center head at the collar. The inlays formed the shape of the rising sun, crowning the dragon in the dawn. Jon, and just about everyone, was at a loss for words. Where did you get the steel? Gendry couldn't hide a smile that showed nothing but pride in his work. When we were at the wall after the battle, I heard about the giant scythe being destroyed by the White Walker's magic. I remembered that the only sword I was able to make successfully was from the steel of Reckon's broken sword, which was also broken by their magic. I'm not sure of the details of how, but I had the idea that maybe you need steel touched by magic to make Valyrian steel. Thanks to some secrecy from the Queen and Lord Tyrion, we got some dragon fire to light a forge, and some blood to quench the material. I took a swing at it with my hammer, and let's just say I have a better one in the works now. Jon looked back at Daenerys and saw she looked very proud at Gendry's work. I thought you could use a good surprise. This was beyond a surprise. Valyrian steel armor had greater value than the weapons did. The breastplate was worth a castle, a big one. It looks amazing. Gendry, thank Lord Tyrion for that. He gave us the design. Jon looked over to Tyrion, who was sitting with Sara Yamay and Sir Bran. I thought it would be grand if it displayed the victory of the War for the Dawn. As far as the direwolves, we all know that you should embrace your true heritage more. But as I once said to you, never forget what you are. Surely the rest of the world will not. Wear it like armor and it can never be used against you. For once, a metaphor could be taken literally. Gendry, Jon said, I can't accept something so valuable as a gift. Do you know the worth of this? More than a lot of gold, but it doesn't compare to what I already have, that you've given me. A home, a name, he tilted his head to Arya, a family. Jon couldn't help but agree with Gendry in that matter. No amount of gold nor possessions or titles would ever match the worth of his family. He smiled at Gendry and embraced his new brother by law. Thank you, brother. There weren't many more after Gendry, who presented gifts to Jon and Daenerys, but those that did tried their best to increase the value of what they gave with honeyed words. Regardless of the value or quality, Jon and Daenerys gave their gratitude and cherished the gifts. The last of the gift-bearers were the free folk. All the leaders of the remaining 15 clans and new northern houses stepped forward all together. Representing them all was Septon. The hall quieted down. Lord Snow, King Jon, you were the second man of the Night's Watch, to give more than a damn about us, while we froze beyond the wall and died at the hands of the Night King and the White Walkers. Most of us didn't follow you to leave Hardhome until it was too late, and we fought together to take back your home and win against our oldest and greatest enemy. We don't have any possessions worthy of giving to a king and queen, but someone once reminded us that we're a part of your kingdom now. We live by your laws and your rules. We can never repay the debt we owe for freeing us from such a life of suffering and leading us to victory, but we can start. Septon and the other clan leaders got down on one knee and bowed to Jon and Daenerys. Jon was probably the only one in the room who felt the gravity of what they were doing. The free folk never bent the knee to any king, until now. Jon stood from his seat and was stunned. He gathered himself and addressed the free folk. You came to us as wildlings, as free folk. We've fought for thousands of years, because of which side of the wall we lived on when it was built. Let today mark an end to those fights, and rise as people of the North, our people. Many banged their tables and cheered as the free folk rose as northerners. Jon wasn't sure if he was meant to feel proud of them, but he did feel pride for their choice and an unyielding gratitude. With all gifts given, the festivities went on, and many began to dance around the giant pit fire. Alice and Suphorn earned a great many cheers throughout the hall, when they both got so lost in their dance that they both leapt over the flames of the fire. It was daring and amazing. Daenerys' sighs made her unable to join a dance with Jon, so she took to conversation while Jon had a dance with Sansa. He didn't know how to step and constantly fumbled his footing, nearly tripping over Sansa. She merely laughed every time he almost did. Jon, Sansa said, it would help if you didn't always look down at your feet. Then how am I not supposed to step on you? He didn't pay attention to his surroundings and bumped into Wyman Manderley, though it felt more like being hit by a boulder, and Jon crashed to the ground. Sansa started to laugh heavily, and so did Wella Manderley, while Wyman started to apologize. Your Grace, forgive me, I didn't see you. Wyman helped Jon up to his feet. The fault is mine, dancing isn't my greatest of skills. Wella snorted. Cleary, Your Grace. Her smile died as she stepped closer to him and spoke quietly, that her father would not hear. Do you happen to know where Lady Brienne's squire is? I haven't seen him with her this evening. Podrick? I think he's with Lord Tyrion and Ser Bran. Wella's eyes widened, and she grew a happy smile. Thank you, Your Grace. She turned back to her father. I'm a bit tired from dancing. Grandfather, if you'll excuse me, I'd like to go partake in some wine with friends. Oh, wonderful, Wyman said. I could use a drink myself. No, but you have yet to dance with Winifred, and it is her last day as your granddaughter, before she is made woman. There was an awkward silence between Wyman and his granddaughter. Fair point. Go on then, and don't get too far into your cups. Willa scurried away while Wyman searched for Winifred. Come on, Sansa said. Let's try again, and this time stop thinking so much and pretend like you're dueling me. Jon rolled his eyes as he took Sansa's hands again. He humored himself and pictured that they were in duel. When she retreated back, Jon advanced where she stepped, and they started to do what could be called dancing. Sansa smiled at him. You see, you can do it. They started to move a bit faster, and occasionally bushed past another pair. Jon caught a glimpse of Daenerys watching him, and she seemed a little envious. Jon had never danced with her before. In fact, his dance with Sansa was his first. Part of the hall erupted in cheers and laughter, and both Jon and Sansa looked over and saw that Arya and Gendry had taken to a drinking contest. Gendry had lost after spitting out the ale he just drank. Jon noticed that Arya's arm was reaching to Gendry in between his legs. Cheap move, Jon commented, but effective. He noticed Sansa smiling, amused at them, but then he also noticed her smile die and a hint of somberness take over. Hey, what's wrong? Sansa shook her head. It's nothing. You look like you're brooding, which means it's something. Jon led Sansa from the floor to some vacant seats. At one of the tables. He sat with her and looked Sansa square in the eye. Tell me what's wrong. It's just, she sighed out and gathered her thoughts. It's a little jealousy is all. Jealousy? Jon looked back at Arya and Gendry, and the two of them were sharing a deep kiss after their competition. They were happy together, Arya especially, despite her rejected feelings to being married. I see. She never wanted what you always have, and now she has it. Sansa scoffed at him. After 2 unwanted marriages, I've wondered if it's my fate to never find someone to love, but to be sold off again and again. Sansa, we promised you that would never happen again. Though Tyrion was a man of negotiation, compromise and convincing words, he had no plans whatsoever for Sansa to be married off. She suffered more enough in King's Landing and more in the hands of Littlefinger and the Boltons. If anyone tries, they'll have to get me and 3 dragons to get to you. Sansa smiled a little, but she still had some doubt. Thank you, Jon. Your Grace, Edric Dane said as he approached. Lord Edric, to what do I owe the pleasure? I was hoping to discuss the matter we previously did at the Dragon Pit regarding Dorne's involvement in the war. Jon had completely forgotten about that. With the dead defeated, Edric was planning to return his armies back to Dorne to take no part in the fight against Cersei. But like I said, I was hoping to, but then I realized that speaking of politics on a night like this would butcher the mood. So instead, might I steal Lady Sansa for a dance? Jon looked back to Sansa and she was wide-eyed and caught off guard. Yes, I would love to. Jon smiled as she took Edric's hand, and the two of them joined the next dance. Sansa seemed to completely forget about her words with Jon and was absolutely radiant. Though dancing with someone who knew how probably helped. While Jon decided to just observe the hall, Tyrion found him and took a seat next to him. You know, I always had a vision of something like when I was Hand of the King to Joffrey, Tyrion informed. Of course it was a fantasy that was free of him and had someone else on the throne. Jon chuckled to himself. Yet here it is, with one last war to wage. Yes, and whoever wins this war will establish the most powerful dynasty in our history, one that could last 1,000 years. Tyrion raised his tankard of ale. Here's to a righteous victory. Jon raised his own. A victory for bastards and dwarfs. They clinked their tankards and each took deep drinks. With the night drawing out and no bedding ceremony, the wilding men picked up their wives and stole them from the longhouse to Winterfell, although Josera instead set Gwenn on his snow bear, Shadow, and led the two of them instead. Jon and Daenerys had too decided to turn in for the night, feeling fatigued from the food and excitement. They changed out of their clothes into their evening attire. Many of their gifts were brought to their room. Daenerys had the ironwood cribs placed at the foot of their bed. She sat by them in a chair, and was feeling her hands over the intricate designs carved into them, while Jon was looking through some of the other gifts. He was drawn to the crown of Aegon the Conqueror, and for some reason was becoming mesmerized with it, like he had a certain attachment to it. The rubies in the front flickered in the light of the fire and had a certain glow to them, just like the ruby of Melisandre's necklace. "You should try it on," Daenerys said. "You are Aegon Targaryen, after all." "Aye, but I'm not a conqueror." Jon set the crown down on the table. "That's not who I am." Daenerys got up from the cribs and walked over to him and took the crown from the table. "You're right, you're not a conqueror, but you fought greater battles than most have. The ones that truly meant something. So what do you think you are?" She lifted the crown and set it on Jon's head. He hardly felt it when it was placed there. It fit perfectly. "You're a hero, Jon, and no one can ever deny that you are. You fought and died for the right thing. Now, because of you, we have a get to live for it." She pulled him down to her and laid a light kiss on him. "Now come to bed. We have much to do tomorrow." They both let rest take over, listening to only the sounds of the soft winter winds blowing through the window and the crackling of the logs in the fire. Daenerys laid on her side, and both she and Jon had a hand over her belly. There was the constant feeling of a kick, reminding both of them that it wouldn't be long until the lives inside would be in their arms. As the veil of sleep took over, Jon began to have strange sense languor in his nose, and an abundance of noises filled his ears. He started to see things in ways he rarely did in his sleep, whenever he would warg into Ghost. He was in the woods with Nymeria and 3 wolves from her pack. Both of them were hunting for food, and they had found the trail of a fat boar. It was close, and getting lazy. The 5 wolves advanced swiftly through the snow, their movements silent as could be. The boar was in sight, and a hunger for blood filled Ghost. The 3 wolves of Nymeria's pack went to flank it, while Nymeria would attack straight on. Ghost would intercept the prey if it managed to get away from the attackers. Nymeria and her wolves moved in fast and took the boar by surprise. One of the wolves managed to bite it at the neck. It squealed out and slammed another wolf in with its head and broke free. Ghost began to run as fast as he could, baring his teeth and ready to sink them into the plump meat. As soon as the boar came close, Ghost lunged forward and tackled the boar down. He bit down hard on the boar's head and twisted it, breaking the prey's neck and killing it instantly. The kill was his, and so was the first bite. Ghost tore into ribs and ate the blood-soaked flesh, relishing every bit of it. The other wolves had begun to partake of the meat as well, sharing in the delicious taste of the animal. Ghost had his fill, and let his sister and the others finish it off. He wandered to a small clearing, while licking his lips clean of the blood, staining the fur around his mouth. From there, the sky was in full view, and Daenerys could be seen flying. Ghost could hear her screech, and felt the pain in her voice. She missed Ygritte. She wanted to fly with her sister. It made Ghost remember his brothers and sister. All of them were gone, except for Nymeria, and all of them had died alone. Nymeria had trotted over to Ghost and sat down next to him. She nudged Ghost with her head, trying to get him to stop feeling sad. She missed them too, but she was strong and didn't show her sadness. A new scent appeared, one that stunk of sweat. There was a pack of animals nearby. Big animals. There were sounds of running, starting to appear. No, not running, galloping. There was a herd of horses riding hard. They were going to the big stone house that the masters were in. There were more scents. Scents of men. Men like the ones that smelled of sand in the sun. All the horses had riders, and they were getting close enough to count. There were 20 horses, but 23 riders. Only when the scent of 3 children became distinct did it make sense. If they were going to the stone house, then they might attack the masters. Ghost howled out to the night, and Nymeria had joined him, calling out to the wolves of Nymeria's pack to go back to the fields of men and horses around the stone house. Jon blinked himself awake when he heard the sounds of howling echoed from the window. He sat up when he realized his dream was no dream, but what Ghost was doing right now. He shuffled out of bed immediately, not realizing he woke up Daenerys. "Jon, what's the matter?" "Riders approaching the castle, and they have children with them." "Riders? What do you mean?" "I'm not sure. I'll go see what it is. But just in case, wait here." Jon put on his boots and his cloak and made for the door, but stopped and looked over to his new sword leaning against his nightstand. He walked over and took it, strapping the belt around before leaving. Standing guard outside the door was Sir Loramus and Kuno. "Sir Loramus, go wake Sir Lil, and both of you meet me in the courtyard." "Kuno. Izat Sir Loraaka. Vijezarat Jun Kalesi." His Dothraki wasn't the best, but good enough for Kuno to understand. It didn't take long for Severil and Sir Loramus to meet with Jon in the courtyard, along with 50 of the house guard. By the time they were gathered, a group of riders had been spotted riding to Winterfell. Jon wasn't sure what to make of them, but he wasn't taking any chances in case this was a ploy by Cersei to get into the castle. He was still uneasy of Rickon's vision and his telling of the next war starting. There was no word of any kind of attack from the south, but no one was sure what to look for. "I want 20 men with crossbows at the ready at the gate, now," Jon commanded. One of the men acting as a lookout called down. The riders almost at the gates. Jon and his Kingsguard walked up to the battlements and looked over and saw the riders approaching the gate. The archers had crossbows in hand, loaded and waiting. A lone rider advanced ahead of the others, and halted, when he came to the closed gates, and called out, "My name is Sir Aemon Teller, captain of the guard of Starfall. I need to speak with Lord Edric Dane immediately." Jon looked at the other riders, and saw that only 10 of them were armed. The rest looked like servants. "Dismount first, and you shall be permitted inside the castle." The riders immediately got off their horses, and gathered at the gate. Jon leaned over to one of the guards. "Go wake Edric Dane from his chambers, and bring him here as fast as you can." "Yes, your grace." The guard ran off as Jon made his way back to the courtyard, keeping one hand on his sword. "Open the gates," Jon ordered. By the time the gates opened and Maester Aemon and his company entered, Jon stood before them and his entire guard was at the ready to defend themselves. "Forgive the precautions, Maester Aemon, but you can understand that riders in the night from the south is a little suspicious, especially just after a war has been won. Lord Edric will be here shortly." Before Ser Aemon could reply, the sound of a baby crying echoed in the courtyard. Ser Aemon looked back to one of his company, a woman. She had a babe in her arms, and beside her were 2 children. "Please, my lord," Ser Aemon said to Jon, "we've been riding for days without rest, and never experienced such a cold." Jon looked at the children, and saw them looking sad and miserable, a little girl, and a young boy. "Of course, if you hand over your arms, we shall provide proper cloaks for you all." Scepter Raymond and the other armed men didn't hesitate to remove their sword belts and hand them over the Winterfell guard. Some of the men rushed to get what was promised and returned shortly, along with Edric Dane. "Sir Raymond," Edric said, "what are doing?" "Papa," the little girl and boy rushed forward to Edric, looking both happy and sad to see him. Edric, on the other hand, was in complete shock. "Etrikira, Gerald, 7 hells," he rushed forward, and fell to his knees to embrace his children who were now crying. "It's all right, my loves. I'm right here. Arthur, where's Arthur?" The woman with the babe in her arms stepped forward. The babe had stopped crying by now. "He's here, milord," the woman replied. Edric stood up with his arms around his 2 children, while they clinged to his clothes. He approached the woman and looked down at the babe, relieved. He looked back to Ser Aemon. "Raemion, what's going on? What are you all doing here? And where's Neela?" "My lord," Ser Aemon said, "Starfall was attacked by SLC sellswords. 4 mercenary companies. We had no chance of defending the castle against them, and had to flee. The last we saw of the castle, it was in lost one of our ships on the way and 40 of the household." "Neela," Edric demanded, "was Neela on that ship?" "No, my lord, she was in the orchard with some of the women when we were attacked. She was brought to the gates and ordered us to retreat. They killed the other women, but I heard the leaders say that Lady Neela was to be kept a hostage to Queen Cersei." "False queen," Edric said, anger present in his voice. No real queen would break a truce and attack a defenseless household. Edric turned to face Jon. Your Grace, about my decision to stay out of the war, I've had a sudden change of heart. The Dornish armies will gladly ride with you and destroy any armies Cersei Lannister has. Edric, the days that followed the morning of unexpected arrivals were a busy ones. Though word was already spreading of the attack on Starfall, there were many from Dorne demanding to know what other destruction has befallen their country, and all of them were on the edge of a rage that could level mountains. Edric had his household servants settle in the castle with his men, save for Maester Aemon, who joined with the Dornish forces in the camps. Unfortunately, 3 of those that arrived in the night had gotten sick on the road and died before sunrise, and the children, they had been so worn out from the hard riding that they slept for an entire day before they were up and about and ate just about as much food as Wyman Manderley did at the feast. The Queen was gracious enough to spare one of the ironwood cribs for Arthur. He had been such a fuss without his mother around, and he hardly ever ate from his appointed wet nurse. Ashara was a blessed soul and always stayed with Geralt. She wanted to keep her brother safe from the bad people that took away their mother. To Edric's personal shame, he rarely had any time for his own children. Since he was busy trying to keep the other Dornish lords under control, many of them demanded that the Lannister forces should be butchered and wiped out for their queen's treachery. But even with Edric reminding them that it was mercenaries that attacked, not them, there was still displeasure among many of them. And thanks to Varys the Spider, Edric learned of whispers that some of the Dornish lords were considering following someone who would take action of vengeance and were attempting to rally others to join them. Things were growing out of control, so much that Edric was losing his grip over it. There were so few who could give their support, and all of them were from Edric's household. The king had more on his plate than Edric did, and there weren't many outside of Edric's rule that he trusted. Maester Aemon was his most trusted out of all, a knight and advisor to Edric's father before him. But even Edric had his suspicions that there could be Lancer loyalists among the armies, and had him keep watch over his children. Outside his household, Edric had a great deal of trust in the Starks and the Targaryens, and Lady Sansa was gracious enough to help him deal with the anger that the Dornish were feeling. The 2 of them had taken to the Great Hall of Winterfell to meet with 3 of the more powerful Dornish rulers. Valiant Oler, newly appointed Lady of House Oler, after her grandfather, Harmon, and father, Rohar, perished at the Wall, Lord Dagos of House Manwoody, and Janessa of House Blackmont. My ladies, my lord, Edric spoke. Please calm down.
Calm.
Lady Janessa scoffed. It amazes me that you would be so passive after the Lancers destroy your ancestral home. Lannister, Edric corrected. Only one is against us, and those sworn to the name are all here, with the other armies, and had nothing to do with the attack. That's beside the point. Lord Dagos exclaimed. We knew those sellsword bastards were at Hellgate before they moved to attack. Our homes lie in the path to Starfall. Who's to say that they weren't attacked, and our people slaughtered? Sansa spoke up. My lord, the raven from Lord Varys' spies will be arriving any time now. We cannot know for sure that what you say can be true. And if our suspicions are corrected, if Dorne is nothing more than a blood-soaked desert of burning castles, what would you have me do? Edric demanded. We're thousands of miles away from the ones that attacked our country and have only what you speak of, suspicions. Lady Valian said. Regardless if our lands have been attacked or not, we must avenge the destruction of Starfall. We should send that Lannister bitch tenfold. The dead you suffered and more if she continues to be a thorn in our sides. The Dornish were acting on blind vengeance, not caring for reason or honor, though Edric knew that to them, it wasn't vengeance for his people. It was for their pride as the people of Dorne. They saw themselves higher than most, and something like this was humiliating for them. You would slaughter men innocent of murder others did. My ladies, my lord, Sansa said. My brother put to the sword Rickard Karstark. His sons were killed by Aemon, and Lord Karstark killed his cousins, Willem and Martin Lannister, to repay the debt. Against honor, against orders, and my brother executed him for his crimes. Lady Janessa had a ghost of smirk at the corners of her lips. And how well did that work out for your brother, the king in the north? He lost half his army and lost the war all because he couldn't keep his desires in his pants. Sansa managed to keep herself calm, but Edric clenched his fists on the table. You dare insult the family that houses us in their own halls. Sansa lightly placed her hand over Edric's fist, but kept her gaze at Lady Janessa. The men of the Westerlands are under the protection of House Stark, and will remain that way. If you take any action against them, then you will be charged with treason and met with the vengeance that you demand. Tenfold what you deliver. They serve Cersei. They are bound to Sutraime, Sansa reminded, and he has pledged his sword and allegiance to House Targaryen. Though there were some like Lady Brienne, Lord Tyrion, and even the king who had their trust in Sutraime's word. Edric did not completely, but he trusted the king's decision, and would defend it. Lady Valian looked more angry than anyone at the mention of Cersei. You would put trust in an oathbreaker, in the man who murdered Eliara Sand. He didn't murder Eliara. Valian, Edric said, with a firm tone. She was tortured inhumanely and Cersei gave her mercy. If anything, you are in debt to him for such. Ha, that'll be a debt the Lannisters never get paid. As far as I have seen, the Oathbreaker has been keeping true to his word of loyalty more than you and the other Dornish have in one morning. The Oathbreaker has done more for us in the past year than Dorne has done for anyone in the past decade. He attempted to take his sister's life before he was forced to flee and pledged fealty to the king and queen. By right of oath and honor, his men are bound to him now, and they are bound to House Targaryen. There was a pregnant silence between everyone for Sansa's words to sink in. Need I remind you all, as Lord Edric has said, that we are thousands of miles away from the ones who committed the atrocities we discuss. If Cersei learns of what we do to her army here, based on blind accusations against the innocent, what's to stop her from making your suspicions the truth? Sansa had an excellent point. The things they were all discussing were in fact based on suspicions. If they took action before they knew the truth, the consequences would be worse than what they could be. Lord Dagos sat back in his chair and looked at Edric. Then what would you have us do? Nothing. Like Prince Doran. Edric was started to get tired of having to answer everyone's questions. He had his own, but he wasn't sure who was the right person to ask for the answers. His wife was in King's Landing, probably stuck in a black cell beneath the Red Keep. At least, that was the best he could hope for, that felt reasonable. If someone had the Mad Queen in check, then Edric might feel a little relieved. But the only people who had any true influence over Cersei were dead. Whatever trusts or connections Cersei had with Lord Jaime were probably severed when he tried to kill her before he fled. We'll finish this tonight, and should I hear of any attacks on the Crown's army, I will make it an obligation to take the head of whoever gave the order myself. And as we are in the north, I shall be the one to do it. As they say here, the man who passes the sentence should swing the sword. Edric stood up with Sansa and waited for the Dornish to leave the Great Hall. Once they were gone, he turned to face her. I'm sorry you had to hear such an insult like that. Sansa finally started to show signs of contained rage. Believe me, if I can have a good excuse, I'll have her torn to pieces by the wolves. The way she spoke showed no hint of exaggeration or sarcasm. She meant what she said. This was the first Edric had ever seen of Sansa that intimidated him of her. For a brief moment, he didn't see her as a Stark, but someone that reminded him of Cersei. As much as I can sympathize with your anger, I would not let that happen. If Lady Janessa gives me reason to, I'll see that she dies, but not mutilated. Sansa shook her head. Forgive me, you're right. That was rash to say. Gods, I feel like I'm turning into Cersei. After what I've seen and know about her, you're one of the furthest people from her. And rest assured, I won't let Janessa's dishonor to your brother's memory go unpunished. Edric turned his head when he heard footsteps approaching them, and saw one of the king's guard, Saralorimus, Mud. My lord, my lady, the king and queen request your audience. Instead of going to the king and queen's room, Edric and Sansa were brought to the lord's chambers. Saralorimus joined one of the queen's Dothraki, and stood guard at the door. The knight opened it for them, and they walked in to find the queen sitting at the desk in the room with King standing behind her. Lord Tyrion and Varys sat in chairs across from the desk next to a vacant ones, meant for Edric and Sansa. Lying down on the stone floor near the hearth was the king's direwolf. Ghost, Lord Edric, Lady Sansa, the queen said. Thank you for coming on such short notice. She gestured her hand for them to sit down. Of course, your grace. Edric sat down with Sansa and noticed that everyone was looking distraught. Varys spoke up. Lord Edric, we received the report on Dorne and another from King's Landing. However, given the current mood of the Dornish, we thought it best to unveil it to you first. Edric almost chuckled. No argument there. As far as we've been told, the only places in Dorne that have received attack are Starfall, the Water Gardens, and Sunspear. The city managed to withstand the attacks of the sellswords, but a group of them infiltrated the city and captured the remaining daughters of Oberyn Martell. It wasn't much to take in, but the news felt overwhelming. Sunspear persevered, but at a terrible cost. Oberyn's bastards were the last of the Martell bloodline, and now only Tyanna was truly safe from Cersei. At least Edric would be able to relieve the Lord Dagos and Ladies Janessa and Velian that their homes are safe. And the report from King's Landing? The report confirmed the captivity of your wife, the Martell bastards, and one other, a girl from the Reach, who could not be identified. Unfortunately, given the difficulty of getting messages in and out of the capital, we've only just learned that they were transported to an unknown location weeks ago. As of now, the hostages are not in King's Landing, but that is the only knowledge we have of their whereabouts. But I can assure you that I have as many of my birds as I can spare on the lookout for any sign of them. Though it was meant to be reassuring, Edric couldn't feel it. It was bad enough that Nyla was taken to King's Landing in the state. It is, but now she was nowhere to be found. When do you plan to make this known to the other lords? Jon said. We'll call for a meeting in the Longhouse at midday. However, we've been hearing about the tensions rising in the Dornish forces. Believe me, hearing about it pales to actually seeing it. The Queen cleared her throat. Nothing has happened that we know of, but we suspect that there will be violent measures taken against Cersei's forces here. Sansa said. It was hard enough trying to sway two ladies and a lord from attacking innocent soldiers because of suspicion. The only things that kept them back were the very threats they made against the Lancashire soldiers. Not the most civil way to end the discussion, but it's the best we can get to intimidating for peace. Regardless if they are intimidated or not, Tyrion replied, we need to take measures so that a battle within an army doesn't happen. Agreed, Daenerys said. How many Dornish soldiers are there? Edric replied. We number 6,000, but without my men the other lords only have around 2,000. Edric was one of the few who didn't give support to Elia when she first allied with the Targaryens. Because of her choice and Tyrion Lannister's planning, 12,000 Dornish were killed battling Euron Greyjoy at sea. Even after that massacre, it was surprising that there were those just as rash and foolish willing to go right into a battle. But Edric had a great loyalty from his men, and there were some of the other Dornish rulers who stayed their hands at his word. Then have your men stand by in case something should happen. The Dothraki horde is acting as a barrier separating the armies, so Daenerys' face tensed a little before she pressed on. Any who wish to fight will have to get through them. She cleared her throat. That will be all for now. Lord Edric, Crono, the Dothraki standing vigil outside the door, entered. Crothat, Fichat Missandei, Tatnana, Septa, Khaleesi. Crono left the room and was shortly followed by Tyrion and Sansa. Varys stayed seated. He must have more business with the king and queen. Edric's thoughts turned to thinking of Nyla. He started wondering why she was even taken in the first place. Was it because of his open enthusiasm and liking to the Targaryens at the Dragon Pit, or because he was acting Lord Paramount of Dorne? Whatever the reason, he wished he could fix it. He never wanted her to suffer such a fate. In the hallway, there was a sudden yelp that sounded like Sansa. When Edric entered the hallway, he saw Sansa standing still in the hallway, looking directly at him, seemingly embarrassed. Lord Tyrion was looking back while he walked away, smirking the whole time. Are you all right, my lady? Edric asked. Lord Dane, she said. I think I found something of yours. She cocked her head back, gesturing that there was something, or rather someone, behind her. As if on cue, two small heads of black hair peeked out from behind Sansa on the opposite sides of her body, behind her dress but under her cloak. As soon as they saw their father, the children darted back behind Sansa, and she seemed to flinch when they did. And they both have a firm grip somewhere they shouldn't. She sounded a little agitated. Edric got down to one knee. Etshura, Geralt, please let go of the nice woman and come over here right now. The two heads poked out from behind Sansa and they slowly started to walk out. Geralt followed behind Etshura as if she were a shield for him. Edric sighed. You two, still as mischievous here as you were in Starfall. Papa, Etshura said. How come we have to stay here? We want to go home. Edric wasn't sure how to explain that Starfall was destroyed in a way that was simple for them. Well, we can't go back yet, because some men broke it, so we have to wait until it gets fixed. How long will that be? Ashara asked as she and Geralt finally got into arm's reach of Edric. To be honest, he had no idea. Not for a while, I'm afraid. Edric's eyes drifted up to Sansa. Ashara, Geralt, do you know who that is? Both of them looked at Sansa and then back to him and shook their heads. This is Sansa Stark. She lives here in this castle and is letting us stay with her. Now turn around and apologize and say something nice about her. He patted his children on their backs when they turned around to face Sansa. We're sorry, Ashara said. We so what? Geralt said. Sansa smiled down to the two of them. I forgive you both. Geralt pointed up to Sansa. Hair pretty. Ashara, on the other hand, gave a compliment most wouldn't like to hear said aloud in front of others. Your bottom is very soft. Edric nearly choked on his breath when she said that. Not something like that, Aisha. Edric groaned. She was still too young to understand what things should and shouldn't be said. But it felt like a lemon cod. Edric pulled her back and placed a hand over her mouth to keep her from embarrassing him, and Sansa more than she already was. I'm very sorry, Lady Sansa. He felt just as embarrassed as she was probably feeling. Sansa was flushed red in the face and trying her best to keep her formal composure. They're only children. Edric nervously smiled at Sansa before turning his attention to Ashara. Listen, there are certain things you shouldn't say, just like there are certain things you shouldn't do. Remember when you got punished for running around the castle naked? Ashara pouted. I got no sweets for a month. And what did your mother tell you when you asked why? Because you should keep your body private until you're married. That's right, and that means you should keep other people's bodies private too. Ashara was never one to like lectures, but then again, who did? She looked up at her father's face. Papa, when will Mama get here? Edric had absolutely no idea how to respond to her. How to tell them that Neela was a hostage to the most vile woman alive in Westeros. There you two are, Septon Raymond said, as he came around the corner. How you got past the maid is beyond me. Forgive me for the escape, my lord. I'll see that they return to their room. No, Ashara shouted, and held tightly onto Edric's doublet. We don't want to go back. We want to see the dragons. Dragons? Geralt repeated. Ashara, Geralt, right now is probably the worst time to see the dragons, because they are very aggravated. His children looked at him confused. Of course they wouldn't know what aggravated meant. The dragons are upset, and anyone who gets close might get hurt or worse. Both of them looked disappointed. They had only caught glimpses of the dragons from the window of their room, but seeing them up close was an entirely different experience. Seeing them like that only made Edric think of how they would react when he would have to tell them about Neela. He had a heavy weight tugging down on his heart. Ashara and Geralt have been asking for their mother ever since they first arrived. They heard what happened to her, but they didn't understand things like hostage and captured. Telling them in a way they would understand would not only sadden them, but scare them. But before he could do that, he had to know one thing first. Lady Sansa, Edric said just before she was to leave. Might I have a word? Of course, my lord. Edric felt a tug on his cloak. Can we come with you, Papa? Ashara asked. It's just going to be a boring talk with me and the king. Go back to your room with Maester Aemon. Edric expected her to get mad and threw a fit. But instead she looked sad, heartbroken even. But you never come to see us until bedtime. 7 hells had he been so occupied that he failed to make time for his children. To be a father. Damn lordships and the things it robbed from him. Lord Edric, Sansa spoke. I have an idea that might work for all of it. It will get their attention for long enough and provide someone to watch over them at the same time. An offer like that, even not knowing what it was too good to say no. Edric looked at his children. Geralt looked excited, but Ashura still had a glum look. I only have a few more things to do, and then I promise you that we can spend some time together today. Maybe I can even convince the king to let you see the dragons when they calm down. That was more than enough to make Ashara's eyes widen, and she gave Edric a tight hug around his neck. Thank you, Papa. We'll be extra good. Promise. It was good to see Ashara happy, but now Edric had to get the king and queen to let her see the dragons. If he failed, maybe she would settle for the eggs. Edric looked back at Sansa. Who did you have in mind? Sansa smirked at him and walked back to the Lord's chambers. Sir Aemon, Edric said, Would you inform the major houses of Dorne that there will be a meeting this afternoon? Also, Edric leaned in closely to whisper, inform my lieutenants to order our men arm themselves. He didn't want to take any chances with an outbreak of fighting in the camps. At once, my lord. Sir Aemon left hastily the way he came, and Edric made his way back to Sansa, who entered the room. Sansa, Jon said, is there something else you need? No, she replied. I'm stealing someone from you. Sansa walked past them and entered the room. Edric peered inside and watched as Sansa brought the children before the queen. Pardon the intrusion, your grace, Sansa said. Who are these two? Daenerys asked. Your grace. This is Ashara and Geralt of House Dane. The children had their eyes fixed on Daenerys as Sansa knelt down to them. This is Queen Daenerys Targaryen. As soon as Ashara heard who Daenerys was, she did her best attempt at a curtsy. Do either of you know what a direwolf is? They both shook their heads, and Sansa pointed over to Ghost, who they didn't see yet. Ashara gasped while Geralt got frightened and hid behind Sansa's cloak. Can we pet him? Ashara boldly asked. You can. He's very tame. Ashara slowly walked up to Ghost, who lifted his head off the floor and looked right at her. She reached her hand out and placed it on his head and started to lightly stroke his mane. He's so fluffy, she squealed out, excitedly. Ghost, with me, Sansa said. She came out of the room followed by Ghost, and Ashara was trailing behind the large white direwolf in awe while Geralt clinged to Sansa, still afraid of him. Jon scoffed as they passed him. Traitor, he muttered as Ghost padded by. Edric thought as he followed after them, and caught up with Sansa. He followed her outside to the courtyard, and it was far less busy than when everyone was preparing to fight the dead, and a much less crowded one. Sansa brought the children to an open area, unpolluted by people. You two have this whole area to play in. With Ghost, just make you don't get too rough with him. Geralt clung tighter to her dress. She knelt down and smiled at him. It's all right. He won't hurt you. Scary, Geralt replied. He does look scary, doesn't he? Neither of them noticed when Ghost approached them. Geralt gasped and hid his face in Sansa's cloak. If you are kind to him, then he'll be kind to you. Geralt peeked out and looked at the big red eyes staring at him. He's very gentle and won't bark at you. I promise. Geralt grabbed onto Sansa's hand while slowly reaching his own hand out to Ghost. Before he could touch him, Ghost licked Geralt's fingers, and Geralt started to giggle. He tickles. Sansa smiled as Geralt let go of her hand and started to pet Ghost. Come on, Geralt, Ashara called. Let's build a snow castle. Geralt rushed off with Ghost to Ashara. Sansa stood up and watched with Edric as they all ran off together. She had a kind heart, which made Edric glad to have a friend like her. You'll make a good mother one day, he told her. Sansa shook her head. After 3 betrothals and 2 marriages, all of them unwanted, I've given up on that. He could not think how to proceed after that. It was Sansa who saved him the embarrassing silence. How are you faring?
I can't answer that yet.
I wish I had a few years more experience in such a position. My wife is out there somewhere, a prisoner, and at the mercy of gods know who, and my children haven't a clue about her. Edric thought saying it aloud would relieve the weight he felt, but it didn't. I have no idea what I'm supposed to do. He felt like he had 1,000 thoughts rushing through his mind, and he couldn't find the one he needed. So find what you can do instead. Knowing that might give you the answer you seek. There's a great many things I could do. I could march my army right now. I could offer to betray you all. He was exaggerating, obviously, and she knew that it's the thing I need to do that escapes me. And right now, I'm worried that any move I make by purpose or accident will be the wrong one. Edric leaned onto the balcony railing and looked down at his children playing in the snow with Ghost. They were happy, very happy, and Edric didn't want them to lose that. He didn't want to lose them. But right now, he was losing sight on how to protect them when the time comes. When I saw Cersei at the Dragon Pit, I knew just from looking that she was more dangerous than I've ever known. And without her father or Lord Aemon to hold her back, there's no telling what she might do. That just made things worse. A person with such power and unpredictability was as dangerous as the Mad King. But given how she's acted recently, I think I notice a pattern. A pattern? Edric asked, and he stood back up and looked at her. Every time we make a move, every time she makes one, They all end with her being deceitful. The queen took Casterly Rock before uniting with us, but Cersei planned on it and used that chance to destroy her remaining fleet. Cersei pledged the Westeros armies she commanded to us and kept the Golden Company in King's Landing, but hired none more sellswords to attack the lands emptied of soldiers. She obviously lies and can't be trusted. It's just her actions that make her unpredictable. As far as we know, she has hostages from Dorne and the Reach, but what if they are more than that? I'm not sure that I follow. What else could they be than hostages? All of them are of value to someone great enough to go to war over. So start at the beginning. Why do you think your wife was taken rather than killed? She is the Lady of House Dane. There could be a number of reasons. Such as, Nala could be a hostage so that Dorne won't fight, but I was going to declare Dorne neutral in the fight against her at first. If that were the case, it would only raise more questions. There's too many things it could be. Then what's the worst reason? The worst. I learned that sometimes we should try asking of the worst possible reason. Someone would do something and see how reasonable it is. So what is the worst possible reason your wife was taken? At first Edric thought the worst reason could be execution, but it didn't make sense to do that. To take her as hostage might be to keep him from fighting. If she's a hostage, she could be threatened with death if I fight Cersei. No. After hearing what Sansa described about Cersei's unpredictability, there had to be more than that. Or she could threaten her with death unless I turn against you. If Cersei were to wrap her control over some of the leaders here, it would be the Red Wedding all over again. Sansa was right. If the Westerland lords kept their loyalty to Cersei rather than Lord Jaime, then that would be 15,000 enemy soldiers at the doorstep to everyone else. And there was still the matter of the girl from the Reach. Whoever she was could factor a great number of soldiers added. Melissa Tarley had 18,000, but the rest of the lords combined had 12,000. Threaten the right one and that would still be a great deal. However, even if an attack within the armies happened, it wouldn't be one that they could win. But it would weaken them enough to rival all of the sellswords at Cersei's command, giving her the advantage she needs to win the war to come. A bell began to ring and caught Edric and Sansa's attention. It was coming from the gates, wagon approaching. The gatekeeper called. After a moment he shouted again, "Find the king and open the gates." "What do you think is going on?" Edric asked. "I'm not sure," Sansa replied. Edric hurried from the balcony and past his children. "Aeshera, Geralt, stay with Lady Sansa." He didn't wait for confirmation, but his tone was firm enough that he didn't need to. On his way, Edric accidentally walked into a man carrying some kegs. Watch where you're going." The man looked absolutely filthy. If he wore salt-stained clothes, he would have been thought to be Ironborn. He spilled some of the contents of the kegs onto his gloves and quickly wiped them clean, but he left bright green stains on his breeches. "Apologies." Edric turned his attention back to the gates, as a crowd of curious people began to form around to see what was happening. The gates opened and a crying man driving a wagon entered. When his horse was stopped by one of the guards, he panicked. "Please, don't hurt me. I'm just a messenger." Getting off his cart, he practically fell from it and got to his knees. "They said they'd kill my family if I didn't bring them here. I'm sorry." "Calm down," one of the guards next to him said. "Bring what here?" "The cargo, Oh, seven hells, they killed the children. Right in front of me." One of the other guards went to see what the cargo was as a large crowd began to form around the area. The guard opened the back of the wagon and gasped and covered his mouth in disgust. The guard with the driver looked at the one at the wagon. "What is it?" he called. "Bodies, wrapped up in wool." The guard looked down at the driver. "What's the meaning of this?" The driver, eyes and face red from sorrow, barely got his words through. "The bodies are one part, the queen's words are the other." By now the king found his was to the front. "What's going on here?" The guard at the back of the cart replied while he and one other began to bring the bodies out of the wagon. "He said he's a messenger. The dead are one part, Cersei's words, the other." He and the other guard laid the first body down gently on the snow-covered ground, and went to get another. The body itself was the size of a child, and the driver did say children, so how many more were to follow? The king approached the driver and stood over him. "What is Cersei's message?" The driver looked up, full of fear. "Tyrion the dragon whore, and the bastard of Winterfell. I congratulate you on your victory against the dead. Now that the country is saved, it is up to you to decide whether you shall have peace or destroy what remains. Surrender the armies you stole from me. Surrender my treacherous brothers, and you may have the savage land of the north. Do not give me what I demand, and more of what I give shall be delivered. Those are my terms, if you dare think to keep what you took from me. A Lannister always their debts. By then, the last of the bodies had been emptied from the wagon and laid next to the rest. There were 6 total. The king approached one of the larger-sized ones and pulled away the wool that covered the head to reveal a piece of decorated cloth resting over the victim's face. He pulled it off and beheld a young girl no older than 17, her face blank and throat slit. The king grimaced when he saw the girl like that, but then looked at the cloth with concern. He muttered a word, quiet, but just loud enough that it could be made out. Terrell. He looked over to one of the other bodies, one of the small one, and pulled the wool covering off, and saw another piece of cloth over the victim's face. Martell. When Edric heard Martell, he took a closer look at the cloth on another just revealed, and saw that it too had the sigil of House Martell. Could the cloths over the faces be some indication of their identities? Edric had no time to think about it when every sense in his body froze after he heard the king say another name. Dane. Through the corner of his eye, Edric could see that the last body unloaded was Reveal, but a purple cloth covered the face. He could also see locks of auburn hair. Her hair. The king pulled the cloth away, and against every part of his all, Edric saw Neela lying there with her throat slit like the others. He couldn't hear himself as he ran over to her body, but he could feel the pain of a scream in his heart leaving his mouth. His soul became completely torn apart as he fell to his knees at Neela's body. This wasn't supposed to happen. She wasn't supposed to die. No matter how much Edric screamed inside of himself that this wasn't true, but a trick, the body he cradled in his arms said differently. Bran. Hours, days, weeks, months. Time seemed to have no meaning in the moments they were being spent with Winter Lily in the cave of the Three-Eyed Raven. There were no indications that time had passed at all, and yet it felt like a lifetime was being spent. Whether it was the light of the sun or the moon, the light from outside never faded or dispersed. But all of that was so minuscule to Bran. Compared to being in a cave with another Three-Eyed Raven and the part of himself he left behind nearly 2 years, everything else seemed pointless. This other version of himself was who he was once before. He was younger, but there were not many differences in appearance to tell either Bran apart from the other. This version, this Brandon Stark, wasn't the Three-Eyed Raven. This was who they were before they were touched by the Night King and before he was shown everything. The Bran that was lost could still feel his emotions. To the Three-Eyed Raven form of Bran, this was both nothing and everything to him that was truly magical and mysterious. He hasn't cared for feeling anything ever since he left the cave. But deep down he has felt the pull to find these feelings again, a pull to find who he once was. Winter Lily stood between the two of them. Do you see why you cannot leave now? Yes, they both replied in unison. Winter Lily looked dumbfounded. This will be difficult addressing each of you. No, it won't, the younger Bran said. I have an idea. He closed his eyes and after a few seconds opened them, revealing the white color of a ward's eyes. His body changed instantaneously, and now a dire wolf stood where he once did, but not just any dire wolf. You became Summer, Bran said. You can address me as such, Bran. Summer's voice spoke through the mind. It didn't seem very fair to Bran to be the one who gets to keep the name. He wasn't Brandon Stark anymore. He hasn't been for a long time, but hopefully he would be soon. He looked to Winter Lily. What is this? The Bran who you were and the Bran who you are now are 2 sides of a coin. At one point, you were the side that was Brandon Stark. But that night when the dead came, that coin flipped to its other side, the side of the Three-Eyed Raven, and became too heavy to turn back. But now, if you ever wish to wake up, you need to stand the coin up on its edge, so that both faces can show. It made sense, and at the same time, it didn't. Both Bran and Summer understood what she meant, but not how. They were both separate beings from the other, 2 different people of the same person. How were they supposed to become of one body and one mind? Winter Lily scoffed at the 2 of them. You each have something the other needs, so you must learn to share. I am perfectly ready to share what I must, said Summer, but it isn't something you simply just hand out on a platter like horns of ale. He's right, Bran told Winter Lily. I felt some things, but I don't know what spurned them. and I don't know what it is I must share with him." "Enough," Winter Lily almost shouted. "You asked 20 questions before I can give one answer." Both Brain and Summer calmed down and silenced. Winter Lily had a great deal of stress about her. She turned to Bran directly. "For the past 2 years you've been the Raven. For those 2 years you have expanded for powers more than Brandon could have ever imagined. But doing so distanced you from him." She pointed to Summer. "Our gifts give us the power to separate us from this world. But if we do it for too long we forget ourselves." Voices of the past began to speak from passages of the cave. "I know it's tempting, but if you're trapped in Summer for too long, you'll forget what it was to be human," Jojen's voice said. Mira's voice came from a different tunnel. "You'd forget us, Bran. You'd forget your mother and father. You'd forget your brothers and sisters. You'd forget Winterfell. You'd forget you. It is beautiful beneath the sea, but if you stay too long you'll drown," Brynden River's voice whispered from the weirwood roots. "At this point," Winter Lily said, "you're tied to an anchor, forever to drown. But luckily for you, I am the knife that will cut you loose. We need you to remember how to feel." "So where do we start?" Summer asked. Winter Lily placed her hand on Bran's shoulder and Summer's mane and took them to Winterfell. "But long ago, we start with the easiest of emotions, anger. The walls of Winterfell were bare of banners bearing the direwolf of House Stark. They were instead littered with the skins of flayed men, with the same painted over them in blood. The towers and keeps were in flames, smoke rising as high as a dragon could fly. In the courtyard, amidst the smoke and flames, a pale-eyed man stood above a Stark king of old, who was kneeling against his will. He was wearing a cloak of human skin and a crown of human bones nailed together. Surround them were flayed sons and daughters of the Stark king, hanging from the walls and nailed to giant crosses. "You will suffer for this, Royce," the Stark king said. "Winter is coming, Royce, the name of many of Red Kings of House Bolton. And yet it isn't here when you need it," Royce replied before he pulled an iron dirk from his belt and slashed it across the Stark king's eyes. "Royce didn't kill him. He only blinded him. And now you will burn in the darkness. But do not fret. I will send your regards to the rest of your kin when we find them." Royce turned away and exited the castle ground as the flames consumed everything within the walls. But when the flames reached Bran, Winter Lily, and Summer, they had not a single effect on them. "The first victory the Boltons won against the Starks," said Winter Lily. "Old Nan told me stories about this," Bran said. "She didn't shy from the truth about the Red Kings." The fires were brushed away by a great gust, and the entirety of the castle transformed. Winterfell was back in how it was meant to be. They were taken to the outside of the castle. An army was camped at the outskirts, and a group of 20 riders and 50 men at arms, bearing a peace banner, waited outside the camp, with the army behind them to meet with some approaching Ironborn. One of the Ironborn carried one of their own over his shoulders, bound, and a sack over his head. The riders, except for one, carried shields bearing the Bolton sigil. The own without was someone far too familiar. "Ramsay, I would be lying if I said I am pleased you have surrendered," Ramsay told the Ironborn as they halted. "I had a bet going with some of my men whether or not you would surrender. And now I owe a few silver stags." Some of the men behind Ramsay chuckled heartily. He dismounted his horse and approached the Ironborn alone, carrying no weapon. The only thing he had was a parchment rolled up in his hand. "I am Ramsay Snow, son of Rose Bolton." The Ironborn carrying who had to be Theon stepped forward. "Dagmar Cleftjaw," he announced, before tossing Theon to the ground. "And here is our great prince." Dagmar knelt down to Theon and pulled the sack off his head. Ramsay's face pulled back, being exaggeratingly surprised at the sight of Theon. "Compared to you lot, he's the prettiest Ironborn I've ever seen." That raised some laughter on both sides. Ramsay raised up his hand, displaying the parchment, as promised by the king in the north. "Robb Stark, you are hereby pardoned of your crimes, and allowed safe return to the Iron Islands. All that is left is to hand over your weapons and you are free to go." Ramsay lowered the parchment and eyed it curiously in his hands. "Our weapons?" Dagmar asked. "That wasn't part of the deal." "No, but if you haven't noticed yet, you are Ironborn after all. What's to stop you from reaving and raping your way back home?" Dagmar rested his hand on the hilt of his sword and eyed Ramsay cautiously. "Come now," Ramsay said. "Do you not think me a man of my word?" There was a cold silence before Dagmar undid his sword belt, and he and the other Ironborn turned over their weapons. Ramsay smiled at them. Well, Dagmar, I must thank you greatly. You've just won me my money back. I bet those same men that you would make the wrong choice. He raised his hand, and dozens of Bolton men flooded around the Ironborn and seized them without any struggle at all. The right choice would have been to die fighting. That would have been far less painful. What are you doing? Robb Stark promised us our freedom. Ramsay's smile died. Do I look like Robb Stark to you? He tossed the parchment aside and turned his gaze to Winterfell. He walked past them and unintentionally stood face to face with the older Bran. The Starks have ruled the North for long enough. I think it's time to decorate the land with something other than direwolves. I was thinking about planting 20 of my father's banners around the castle. If you ask me, a banner is a little too simple. But luckily for me, I have 20 Ironborn instead. He turned back to his men. Put them in chains. We'll flay them after we take care of the great prince of the Iron Islands. The moment the Ironborn heard what their fate would be, they all began to struggle, and some of them even screamed for mercy. "Milord, Ramsay," one of the soldiers said, "shall we retake the castle now?" "Retake it?" No, there is much more to be done before we take the castle." Ramsay turned his head to Winterfell. "Pick a dozen or so of the castle residents and take them prisoner. Do what you will with the rest. After that, burn it." The Bolton men were welcomed into the castle at first, but immediately began to attack. Some of the men desperately tried to resist and fight back, but it was hopeless. Farlan the kennel master was forced to watch his daughter Paula raped before a spear was driven into his back. Meccan's head was pressed down on his own anvil when a large Bolton man swung one of Meccan's hammers and crushed his skull. Summer had begun to growl furiously and even tried to attack some of the men, but he merely passed through them like a ghost. He looked over to Bran as his attempts failed again and again. "Do something. You have the power to help them." "I can't," Bran replied. "The ink is already dry. I can't change what has already happened." "Oh, shit. You can, but you don't want to. You don't care about them anymore. You don't care about anyone. Not our people. Not our family. Not even your friends. And yet it was you who caused this. You let the Night King touch you. You who let the dead into the cave. You who got the others killed." Bran didn't realize it until then, but he was clenching his fists tightly and raised his voice. "Because of you, I drove our only friend left away from us. I drove Mira away." The anger that flared up within him had dispersed, replaced with regret. Perception screamed out when another man took his turn with her. She was clawing at the ground and face red with tears. "Fuck it." Bran warged into a crow nestled at the top of the broken tower. He flew down to the rapist and fluttered before him, clawing at his face and tearing through one of his eyes. The man released Pala as he began grasping his eye and screaming. An arrow found its way into the crow and Bran was brought back to himself. Pala crawled away as the man rolled on the ground, bleeding from his eyes. Some of the other Bolton men laughed at him and took Pala with the others. They would take prisoner. "I'm sorry I had to show you this," Winter Lily told them. "But it was the only thing that you hated so much. To see your home and your people torn away from you. Through this, you remember anger. But now, it's time you remember sadness." The moment the Bolton men set the castle aflame, the three of them were taken away from this horrible moment in time to the present. The three of them stood at the top of the portcullis, looking down into the courtyard as a sobbing man drove a wagon into the castle and revealed the bodies inside. When the last of the bodies was revealed, Edric Dane emerged from the onlookers, shrieking out in horror when he saw the woman who lay there. "That's Edric's wife, Neela," Winter Lily told them. "Mama." A little girl rushed out of the crowd to the woman Edric was holding in his arms. She had the same hair and eyes as Edric did. "Mama." She fell to her mother's body and began to weep, as much as her father did. Edric tried to keep her away, but his efforts were in vain. "In times of war, even those that don't wield a sword are casualties," said Winter Lily, "but it's always their deaths that are grieved the most." Bran had seen more death than any living man. He witnessed the slaughtering of the children of the forest, the massacre of Hardhome, the butchering of Aegon and Rhaenys Targaryen, Maester Targaryen being torn to pieces by a mob at Bitterbridge. Cruel death never ran short in Westeros, and there would never be an end to it. But this was a torture for Edric's daughter, a pain no child should suffer. Summer whined as Ashara's crying was loud enough for everyone to hear. Sansa had burst from the crowd and taken Ashara into her arms and away from the bodies. "No," Ashara cried out. "Mama." Though the Bran, Summer, and Winter Lily were too far to hear normally, Sansa's whispers were as if she were right next to them. "Don't look," she begged. "Don't look. Please don't look." She was just as horrified at this as most were, but she had a great pain she shared with Ashara. She knew the weight of seeing a greatly loved one taken away. Sansa was near in tears as Ashara cried into the fur of Sansa's cloak. It didn't take long for someone else to cry out at the sight of the dead, but this time it was a woman. "No, Tattala! Not my Tattala!" Lady Melissa Tarley fell to her knees when she saw her daughter Tattle dead with the others. Samwell was with her and knelt down to her, embracing her and trying to give comfort. He didn't shed tears, but the pain in his heart showed on his face. Before things could get worse than they were, Jon had ordered for the bodies to be taken away for care and prepared for a burial. Whether or not he would have them burned on a pyre or have their bones sent to their homes was yet to be said. The 4 Dornish children were identified as Oberyn Martell's bastard daughters: Elia, Doria, Obella, and Laressa Sand. All of them were Tyrion's sisters by their mother. Now she and Sarella Sand were the only ones alive with Martell blood. "Cersei did all of this, just for a message," Summer said. "This isn't a message," Bran said. "It's just evil." "No, Mama," Ashara cried out one last time before her voice changed into Sansa's, and the 3 of them were at the Great Sept of Baelor. "No, Father, no. Somebody, please help him." Sansa was held back by one of the Kingsguard as Eel in pain lined ice with Father's neck. Bran stood directly in front of his father and watched as his family's ancestral sword was brought into the air. As the sword was brought down, Bran heard his father muttering in a whisper, "I kept my promise, Lya." Ned Stark's words ended as the blade cut cleanly through his neck. Bran felt a stab in his chest, but it was no knife or arrow that made him feel pain, it was misery. Summer began to howl out, his voice rising above the crowds but heard only by Bran and Winter Lily. "I'm sorry," Winter Lily said. "He never deserved this." "No," Bran said. "He didn't." He turned his head and saw Sansa pass out in horror, and Joffrey looking proud. But Cersei, she was the only one who looked aggravated at this. Bran had never truly met Cersei Lannister, but something about her demeanor affected him in a way he could not yet describe. There was a curiosity, one had often had as a child, one that led him to that tower. This feeling drove him to explore once more. The steps to the Great Sept had changed into a bedroom in the Red Keep. Cersei's face had suddenly transformed into what she looked like now. She was sitting at a small table in a light robe with a chalice of wine in one hand and a raven scroll in the other. Daario Naharis was sitting on her bed, pulling his shirt back on. "Are you sure it wise to have those girls killed like that?" Daario asked. "No one would look to you as queen anymore. Just another murderer, and the last person who sat on the Iron Throne who was called a murderer was a certain Targaryen, a mad one." The Cersei of the now smirked as she sipped her wine. "Let the peasants say what they will. When they see me, they shall fear me. There is no greater way to keep them in line." "And what about the Targaryens? Once they see that you broke the truce, they and their armies will have more cause than any to attack. Even with the spike pits, the wildfire, and the scorpions, our chances to win this battle are slim. I've never fought in any battle, but I know to learn from those who have. Satinus Baratheon led 6,000 men north of the wall and broke an army of 100,000 wildlings without ever meeting the entire force. They attacked a group of 700 and captured their king beyond the wall. After that, the rest of the wildlings dispersed. Cut off the head, and the body perishes. While those fools at Winterfell grieve, they won't notice the approaching blade. By tomorrow's end, the war will have been won, and their army will scatter about, and we will destroy every last one of them." Daario helped himself and poured a glass of the wine. "The last time I ever saw the Dragon's head was the size of a horse, but Rhaegal and Viserion were smaller. From what the spies reported, Dragon is now the size of Barry the Dread. Rhaegal could devour a small horse in one bite, and that blue one is as large as Dragon was when Daenerys left the Bay of Dragons for good. Are you sure you want to anger 3 beasts as powerful as them? A dragon with a rider flies and attacks in coordination. but a wild dragon, and an angry wild dragon. Not even I am so curious to witness what would happen. And thus the world will see the true nature of the dragons. Creatures that bring nothing but fire and death that must be exterminated from the world. Summer growled at Cersei and lunged at her, but the room vanished, as did the people in it. The three of them were back in the cave. What did she mean by that? Cutting off the head? Mance Rayder was the head of the Wilding army. So the head of the Targaryen army is Jon and Daenerys, Bran replied before turning to Winter Lily. Take us to Jon. They were brought to the Godswood. Jon was with Ser Davos, Tyrion and Ser Jorah, and Ser Loramus, who were acting as his guard. What is the latest report from our people in King's Landing? What do they say about Cersei's caches there? Jon asked as he paced back and forth. I spoke to Varys, but he has heard nothing. Any news from south of the Neck is hard to come by. Tyrion admitted with a great sigh. Jon turned to Ser Loramus. Have you heard anything about your men? Anything at all? I'm sorry, Your Grace. Neither Will nor I have had any contact with Raleigh and the others since we parted ways. Jon was angry, far more than Bran had ever seen him. This has gone too far. I want our armies to ready to march on the capital as soon as they possibly can. We cannot act rashly either. If anything, that is what my sister will expect. Tyrion was trying to calm him down, but it was having no effect on him. And while we sit here and do nothing, Cersei could be stealing children from their homes and sending their bodies with throats cut like she already has. We can't wait any longer. Your Grace, Ser Davos intervened. We do need to end this as quickly as can, but while the wildfires beneath the city and Cersei alive to order it lit at any moment, we need to be cautious about our every move. Ser Davos is right. Tyrion nodded his head towards the smuggler. Cersei can be unpredictable at her worst. She is little better than Aerys was when my father reached the city gates. Probably worse, actually. We need to take extreme caution, even though I understand every fiber of your being says otherwise. Your Grace, Ser Jorah said, may I suggest something? Anything at this point? Perhaps we can clear out the city of people before the wildfire is lit. I've heard rumors from Lannister men about what Cersei is doing to the people. If they knew, maybe they could run before it's too late. And what rumors are these? Tyrion asked. From what I've heard, Cersei's grain stores have emptied. She collects the dead from the streets and butchers them for the small folk. Both Tyrion and Davos tensed from disgust. Instead of listening for whispers, we should start spreading our own, Tyrion said. It could work, but what if Cersei catches on? All of this rides on Cersei. Ser Davos reminded. I think that if we are to have any chance, the best one is to rid ourselves of the one in charge before she has the chance to destroy everything. What do you mean? Jon asked. I mean that maybe if Cersei were to die before the fighting started, the city could be saved, and the sellswords cornered. No, we're not sending assassins. We're not stepping down to her level. I'm not talking about sending an assassin, I'm talking about sending the right person. But Jon's all right, but what about Daenerys? Summer asked. What's she doing right now? The Godswood transformed into the Lord Solar of Winterfell. Daenerys was speaking with Varys at the desk. They were both upset, Varys more than Daenerys. Your Grace, Varys said, I would ask for forgiveness for my failures. However, there are too many for me to be deserving of it. The fault is not yours, Varys, Daenerys told him. We've all been too trusting that things would go how we wanted them. We failed to let ourselves see that Cersei would go back on her word. We were drunk from our victory, of our survival. Winter Lily had a sympathetic look towards Varys. It's not his fault. Cersei's spies have been doing everything they absolutely can to intercept Varys's little birds. He had not a single bit of power to prevent it from happening. Regardless of what the excuse may be, Varys continued, Cersei has managed to thwart me at my own game through Qyburn, a feat only done by Lord Baelish. There was almost a wistfulness in his tone before he spoke again. But unlike Littlefinger, Qyburn is not driven by a quest for power. I don't care what Qyburn is driven by. He's a dangerous enemy, and I wouldn't mind if he met the same fate as Petyr Baelish. Daenerys said with a hint of hatred. As far as you know, where do your little birds remain silent? Throughout the Crownlands, and the southern borders of the Riverlands. Varys was startled by a knock on the door and then the wagon driver entering, closing the door behind him. Apologies, Your Grace. His voice shook with fear. I didn't mean to disturb, but I'm too afraid I might not survive to beg for your mercy. The king wouldn't see me, and neither will the Stark lady. Your grace, I didn't kill those people. I just drove wagon. Please, show mercy upon me." He got down to his hands and knees and almost broke down in tears. "They made me watch as they killed those women and children. I didn't do anything. I swear it by all the gods." "What is your name?" Daenerys asked. "Benjamin, your grace. Please, I'm no one special." "You have nothing to fear, Benjamin," Daenerys told him. "I will not punish a man for the sins of others." "Forgive me for interrupting, your grace," Varys said, "but who allowed you into the room? The guards would have announced you and asked for your permission to enter." There was sudden stillness in the room that even Bran felt. Something wasn't right. Cersei said that everyone would be distracted with grieving, while the head was to be cut off. "The guards?" Benjamin asked. He looked up and the fear had all disappeared from his face, and was replaced with an emptiness of emotion. "The guards are dead. The Dothraki don't wear much armor, so sticking them with a knife is rather easy." Before anyone could react, Benjamin reached into his sleeve and pulled out a knife, small enough to be concealed and sharp enough to kill. With a great speed, he dashed forward as Varys got out of his seat to stand in between him and Daenerys. Except the queen wasn't the intended target. The knife pierced Varys in the chest, puncturing his right lung. Varys coughed out as his mouth filled with blood and instantly fell to the ground. "Varys!" Daenerys shouted out, but no one was close enough to hear. She backed out of her chair, throwing it down in front of her. A woman tries to run, yet she moves away from the door. The driver reached a hand to his chin and pulled away at his face. It came off like a mask, and his hair and body changed instantly. He grew taller, and his hair was now red with a white stripe. 2 of 5 names have now been given to the many-faced god. Mylesa Tarly and Varys the Spider. Now only 3 remain. Tyrion Lannister, Sansa Stark, and Daenerys Targaryen. Summer growled at the faceless man. "We have to do something. We have to stop him." The faceless man showed a hint of a smirk. A man cannot be stopped, especially by those who are only spectators to death. Summer ceased growling and instead whimpered. He became afraid. "What is he?" Daenerys became wide-eyed. "You're a faceless man, like Arya. The girl named Arya Stark knows our ways, but she is no faceless man. She gave the many-faced god the death that was owed, just as I must. And now the 3rd name shall be given, but not until Daenerys Targaryen makes a choice." "A choice?" Daenerys asked. The door began to bang constantly. Someone outside the room was trying to break through the lock. Daenerys Targaryen must die, but to kill her would kill the lives she carries. So Daenerys Targaryen must give a man 2 names to repay what he takes. Daenerys shook her head. I will not trade the lives of my children so that others may die." The man looked displeased. "Then the lives are forfeit." "Eliaranaron," Varys muttered through the blood in his mouth. "You are Eliaranaron." Varys said no words after that, nor did he breathe. The man stood in place, terrified of what was just said. He then began to cough. At first, it was light, but then it became heavy, and water began to erupt from his mouth. Now he was choking, and he collapsed to his hands and knees. Dropping the knife aside, the water would not stop, and soon it was like he was spitting out a river. His skin purpled and his eyes began to bulge. Soon there were colorings of blood in the water. After a period in frustration, the man collapsed to the ground, and the water stopped coming out of his mouth. And slowly, his face began to slide away. His body changed again. His hair grayed and size shrunk. His skin wrinkled, and after the man's face was gone, a woman far into her years remained. "Eliaranaron," Bran said. "Who was she?" "She was one of the first faceless men. Besides that, she was no one," Winter Lily explained. The door finally broke open, and Catelyn Lannister tumbled in, Valyrian steel sword in hand. This startled Daenerys, and she fell back on her knees. He stepped forward slowly, scanning the room, and the bodies that lie dead. Savage Hadbu knelt down to Varys' body and closed his eyelids. The moment his fingers made contact, the 3 were taken to a memory, not too long ago, to the day Sarahjaime arrived in Winterfell with Bran and the Dothraki. Sarahjaime was found by Varys. "I was in a great anticipation for your arrival," said to Jaime. Varys admitted. My little bird sang a song about you, even I found hard to believe. But fine that I must know. Did you really try to kill your own sister? The woman who calls herself Cersei is not my sister. She died the day she killed our child. My, how far you have fallen. To openly to admit your taboo. Yet now you have nothing else to do, but rise back up. So tell me, good setter, if your sister does not sit upon the Iron Throne, then who does? A mad queen who I have no doubt will kill every single soul that is marching north to fight the dead. Even with such a truce, I think we are all going to see her draw blood before she is willing to step down from the Iron Throne. But what makes me worry is how she's become more dangerous than I ever thought. The vision faded back into the present. Daenerys struggling to get up. Maester Aemon held his hand out to help her. Your Grace, are you all right? What happened here? Who is this? She took his hand, but before she could give her answer, Daenerys winced and cried out as she started to get to her feet. She fell back to the ground, both her hands covering her belly. Your Grace. Jaime rushed to her side. What's wrong? The babies, she started, but her attention shifted over to the door. Sir Jaime turned around and saw two men in Lancar with their swords drawn entering the room. His left hand went to the hilt of Widow's Wail. What are you doing here? They practically ignored him and looked directly at Daenerys. For the queen, each of them muttered. Sir Jaime drew his Valyrian sword to defend Daenerys as the first of the two men charged forward. With his first block, it was obvious that his skill was still far behind what it was with his right hand. He made use of his golden hand and backhanded the first man across the face, causing him to trip over Varys' body. The second man had already swung his sword at Jaime, but didn't expect him to catch it with the golden hand. Sir Jaime stabbed Widow's Wail into the second man's armor at the chest to kill him. Sir Jaime didn't even have his sword pulled out of the man's chest when he realized that the first man was right next to him, with his sword raised. There was an instant moment that Sir Jaime knew that he was going to die. Bran wouldn't let that happen. So he warged into the man's mind and tore his thoughts apart. The man froze in place and dropped his sword before falling to the ground, shaking violently. Sir Jaime used this chance and pulled his sword free and stabbed it into the shaking man's heart, killing him instantly. Mereen felt a searing pain in his chest when he returned to himself. Why would you do that? Summer asked. He's the one who crippled us. He's the one who pushed us out a window to kill us. I didn't do it for him, Bran replied. I did it to save Daenerys. If Jaime Lannister dies, then no one will protect Daenerys and her children. The floor suddenly shook violently, for only a brief moment, and was followed by a flash of green light from the window. Both were obvious signs of something terrible. Wildfire, Bran muttered as he dashed to the window, not seeing that Sir Jaime was right next to him. They looked outside and could see that the Winterfell armory has been almost completely destroyed and was covered in the green flames of wildfire. Without warning, an explosion of wildfire happened, but this time it was in the Winterfell forges. There were many who were near and became consumed by the flames. A third explosion happened at the storerooms, followed immediately by a fourth in the Great Keep, but the blast only destroyed half of it. The outside began to fill with screams of pain and panic, but they were soon overpowered by battle cries of men in Lancer colors spilling into the castle grounds. Grenn, Summer, and Winter Lily were taken outside to the courtyard, where the Lannister men were entering and attacking. They were coming in by the tens and all had this crazed devout look about them. The Lannisters are attacking, Bran stated. Not all of them, just the undying loyalists to Cersei. Winter Lily corrected. One of the Winterfell guards was charging straight for her, but he was meaning to attack a loyalist behind her. The moment before he would have collided with her, Winter Lily brought Bran and Summer to the battlements, giving them a full view of the chaos. The loyalists had taken the castle by surprise and slain many who got in their way, be it soldier or just one of the residents. But they were about to be met by a small force of 30 men charging to meet them. Jon led them men at the van with Ser Jorah and Ser Ilorimus behind him. Among the charge was Brienne and Podrick, followed by Edric Dane, who looked more bloodthirsty than anyone there. Jon carried a spear in one hand and a stark round shield in the other. He thrust the spear into one of the loyalists with a mighty war cry. As the two forces met, the shaft of the spear splintered and broke in half, before Jon tossed what remained aside. But before he could draw his sword, he had to use his shield to beat another man's head bloody. The shield dropped from his arm before he wrapped his fingers around the handle of his sword and drew it. The moment Jon clashed his sword with an attacking axe, the axe blade shattered into pieces, and the Valyrian steel of the sword began to make a noise, almost as if it was singing. Jon gripped his sword with both hands and thrust it deep into the Loyalist's chest, killing him instantly. At long last, the blade had its first kill. With every swing, every kill, the blade of Jon's sword would ring in a harmony. "What is that noise?" Bran asked openly. "I've never heard a sword ever sound like that." Winter Lily smirked down as she watched the battle. "It is the song of the sword. The noise is the power it holds." "But what is it?" Summer asked. "The sound of magic. There is no greater thing imbued with such power, so much that some of it escapes into a song of ice and fire. No sword has ever been more perfect for its wielder." "What do you mean by that?" Bran asked. "Dawn," Winter Lily said. When Bran's confusion continued, she explained further. "Dawn is the son of Rhaega Targaryen and Lyanna Stark. Rhaega was the last dragon, and Lyanna was a daughter of winter, fire and ice. This weapon was made for Jon, reforged in dragonfire, after it was plunged into the chest of the Night King. They are together the songs of ice and fire." The song was broken, then by a man roaring out in hatred. Bran, Winter Lily, and Summer turned their attention back to the battle, and saw Edric Dayne charging into the fray with Dawn and First Light in his hands. The moment the Loyalists were within his reach, he tore through them without even a hint of hesitation or remorse. Dawn and First Light carved through all the steel that met their edges. But his form and technique were horrible. He was killing, but if anyone tried to, they kill him just as easy. Edric impaled a man with both of his sword and shouted like a wild animal at him as the life left his eyes. He was no knight or lord in this battle, just an angry killer. His fury was blinding him to everything around him. He kept pushing forward while everyone else was pulling back to form a solid defense. He fought two men at once, and they could barely block his flurry of strikes, but it was then that Edric's rage blinded him to see the blade that slashed down at him, cutting across his chest. He dropped his swords and fell to the ground, alive but injured. He was saved when a crossbow killed one for the men he was fighting and a spear the other before getting dragged back by one of the Northmen. There were still dozens of Loyalists in the courtyard, all of them proving their skill and cutting down most of who came to challenge them alone, as Edric did. But reinforcements from the camps were coming. A giant stormed through the portcullis with a small tree trunk he was using as a club and started to crush anyone wearing Lanza Red. There were a few more giants rushing to the castle, followed by many other soldiers to aid in the attack. But some of the Loyalists fought their way to the gatehouse and succeeded in taking it and dropped the gate, cutting off any reinforcements. The giant already inside was facing men with spear and wore no armor to protect him from them, except for a whale's rib bones around his chest. But after a spear pierced into the giant's chest, he fell down and died. "Enough of this," Summer growled at Bran. "We can't just watch this any longer. It's not right." "No," Bran said, "it isn't." He felt a spark of desire arise within him. "I won't just be the watcher while everyone fights and dies." Finally, all Bran could do was warg into an animal at the moment, but a flock of ravens wasn't going to be enough. He needed something far more dangerous with wings. He reached out and searched the skies and the lands for where his solution was, and sure enough, he found Laeris with her brothers, miles away on a hunt, but flying back when they sensed their parents in danger. He felt himself and Summer both warg at the same time into Lyras, something that only Jon was able to do until now. Her mind was in a state of panic as she flew with her brothers back to the castle. "You're faster than them," Bran told her. "Jon needs you now." Hearing his words, Lyras flew past Drogon and Rhaegal, and at far greater speed and left them behind. The castle was on the edge of the horizon, but rising into the sky were two towers of smoke, one of them tinted a putrid green, but the other as black as Drogon's hide. There was a fire of evil in the castle, and another coming from where all of the men were camped. Getting closer, Lyras could see that a great portion of the tents were set afire, most likely by the bad men attacking. Lyra screeched out as she swooped down onto the castle walls, perched just above where the fighting was. There were too many of Father's men to use her fire, but enough of the bad men that she could just reach her neck down and feast on their bodies. She bore her teeth and latched them around two men at once, piercing through their steel skin as easily as flesh. She bit down hard and separated their legs from their bodies. The taste of blood was satisfying, but she was not hungry. She spat out what remained and looked for more to kill. There was a long line of men with bows shooting at her on the walls, and none of Father's men were near. She opened her mouth and let out her flames on them, enjoying their screams as they tossed and turned. She crawled down into the courtyard, stepping on many who got in her path. She sank her teeth into another man who was rushing at her with a sword, and tossed his body at his allies. Amidst the fighting, she spotted Father forced back with his men. One of the bad men cut through the man next Father, who wore a dragon on his steel skin and was going to kill Father. Lyris couldn't let that happen. She let the heat build up with her to unleash a Father, but before she could, one of Father's men in green clothes took the blow meant for him. He was cut across his back and yelled out. Father noticed this and killed the man who attacked Father's savior. Father pulled the man away from the battle, staining his clothes in his blood. Father was swarmed by his own men. He was safe now, and the tides were turning. Bran returned to himself and gasped for air. Warging into a dragon took a great amount of energy from him. I can't believe I did that again. It felt incredible. What about you, Summer? But when Bran looked up, Summer was gone. Nowhere to be seen. Where did he go? He's right here. He's a part of you again, like he once was. Winter Lily smiled proudly at Bran. My work is done, but you need to go save someone who needs you now, and wake up. Bran and Winter Lily were both in his room when she said that. He was laying on the bed, asleep as he had been for months. At the foot of his bed was Meera, holding a dagger in her hands. She barred the door with his wardrobe, and there were men trying to break in. Meera, Bran whispered. He looked back at Winter Lily. Thank you, for everything. Winter Lily's smile broke for a second, and she looked sad. What's wrong? Bran asked. Winter Lily began to cry. This is the last time I ever get to see you. What are you talking about? Who are you? She smiled at him. You won't remember me or most of this when you wake up. Now close your eyes. Bran couldn't. What was it about this woman that intrigued him so? He wanted to ask half a dozen more questions. He wanted to know so much, but then he thought maybe he will know, but not today. Close your eyes, she whispered to him. Bran let his eyelids fall down like entering a wonderful sleep. Well deserved. The weight of the sight began to vanish, and he could feel the world around him disappear. Until we meet again, Father. Meera. The barricade was holding strong, though a wardrobe was hardly a barricade. But the pounding from the outside wouldn't stop. Ever since the rumbling and the boom from outside, there were men shouting and sounds of steel clashing against steel. Meera knew the sound of a battle when she heard it, and wasn't taking any chances. She moved the wardrobe in the room to block the door, and it was long until someone started trying to break in. But even if they did manage to get in, all Meera had was a dagger and no armor, only her clothes from the swamps and her cloak. She stood by the bedside with her dagger in hand, watching for the moment when the wardrobe would be moved just enough for someone to finally break in. She could feel herself shaking with fear. She was supposed to go home today, but the bodies that were delivered put a hold on that. Instead, she was trapped in a room with only herself and the three-eyed raven. He was asleep on his body as he always was, never uttering a sound or moving an inch. A sudden splintering of wood sent a shiver throughout Meera's body. The wardrobe shifted and the door was cracking open every time it was banged. She tightened her grip on her dagger as a man's voice from the hallway called out, "We only want the cripple. Just give him to us, and you live." "Leave now, and you can live," Meera retorted. "A fucking girl? Now we definitely won't kill you. It's more fun when there's a struggle." The mercy of being chained up at the mercy of the Night's Watch at Craster's Keep flashed in her mind. They were going to rape her, had Jojen not stopped them, and the true brothers of the Watch arrived. But now there was no one but her, and however many were outside the door. Meera stepped backward and leaned to Bran's ear, praying that he would hear her. "Help me," she whispered. The wardrobe was pushed over as the door was forced open. There were 3 men in Lannister armor. 2 of them had swords in hand, but the one leading them had a battle axe. Meera held her dagger to them, and they only sniggered at her. But their smiles disappeared when the leader looked at Bran. Terrified, Meera stole a quick glance at Bran and saw his eyes were wide open and pure white. Seconds later, there was a loud snarl and a gray blur that tackled one of the men in the hallway. He screamed out for only an instant before there was a snapping of bones and tearing of flesh. "It's one of the fucking wolves!" The other 2 men charged into the hallway, shouting out battles cries that were short-lived. For Cersei, the leader was knocked back into view and was on the ground, looking like he was about to shit himself from fear. He tried crawling away, but the snarling dragged him out of sight, and the last noise he made was a scream that could crack glass. Moments later, the largest of the direwolves trotted into the room with blood staining the fur around her mouth. Instead of snarling, the direwolf looked calmly at Mira. "It's Nymeria, isn't it?" Mira asked as if expecting an answer, but the only one she got was the direwolf leaving the room. "Thank you." Worried that more would come, Mira sheathed her dagger and ran into the hallway. The floors were stained with blood, and all of the Lannister men had their throats ripped out. Mira retrieved one of the swords and stepped back into the room, not expecting to hear a familiar voice. "Mira." She was completely shocked to see Bran's eyes back to being brown. His voice was hoarse and dry, but it ought to be given how long it's been since he spoke. "You're finally awake." She spoke plainly. "Was that you and the wolf?" She wanted to feel happy, but she remembered what he would be returned as. Nothing. She had to remind herself that he wasn't Bran. He was the three-eyed raven. "Mira." "There's probably more coming, so we need the door shut again." "Mira," he called out, and he sat himself up. "It's me." She almost laughed. "I know it's you. Who else would you be?" "No, Mira, it's me. It's Bran." She froze for a moment when she finally realized what he was trying to mean. "Bran? Not the three-eyed raven." "I'm still the three-eyed raven, but I'm Bran again." For a moment he looked scared, and she didn't why. In fact, she felt scared too. Scared that this was just a bad dream, or just her imagination. "Are you sure you are? Are you sure you're not just remembering how to be Brandon Stark?" "I don't need to remember how. I am Brandon Stark." Mira walked over to him slowly, almost as if he was a direwolf that would lash out at the wrong move. But when she was close enough, she knew it in her heart, that this was Bran. She rushed forward and wrapped her arms around him, and he did the same to her. "I didn't think you'd come back." "Neither did I. I thought I'd be lost forever, but I made it back." She let him go and took a moment to look at his eyes. Before they were devoid of anything, except color, but now she saw emotion in them. He smiled up at her. "So what did I miss?" Finally, she broke into a small fit of laughter and shoved him in his shoulder. "There's a battle going on outside the castle." She sat down by his side. "What happened to you after you fell asleep?" He looked puzzled and shook his head. "The last thing I remember was getting attacked by the Night King. After that, I only remember seeing you." She scoffed at him, playfully. "You were here, in a dress, telling me goodbye." Mir's smirk vanished when he said that it was the night of the feast that she came here to say her farewell to him, and her confession. "You said there was something you wanted to say after made it to the castle. What was it?" Mira swallowed when he asked. She wasn't ready to tell him now. Something for later, when the war is won. Speaking of war made her remember that there could still be men coming for Bran. "We should get you out of here. There might be more looking for you." "No, the rest are going after Daenerys." He stared off into the distance. "But she needs help. She's about to give birth to her children." What?" And outside, Jon's leading the men and retaking the courtyard. "They've almost won." Bran began to pull the blankets off him. "Can you take me to him? I want to go see him." "Are sure it's safe?" "I'm sure." While Mira struggled to help Bran, 4 Stark guards came to the room. "My lord, are you all right?" "When the battle began, His Grace told us to come here and protect you," one of them said. "We didn't expect to find you awake. It's good to have you back." "We are fine, but I need to see him," Bran told him. "And the Queen is in danger. You must go to her now." 2 of the men departed for the Queen, while 2 stayed to assist Bran. With their help, Bran was outside in the courtyard in minutes. Mira trailing behind his chair, his eyes scanned the area until they found what they were looking for. Jon was there and looked unharmed, but Lord Reed... Mira noticed where his gaze fell. "Father," she yelled, taking off in a run to where her father lay in Jon's arms. He looked up as she approached, moving out of her way, when she reached them. He was bleeding heavily from a wound on his back, a large gash. "Mira, Jon could not get the words out. "I was paying back a debt long due, Your Grace," Howland muttered. "Your mother saved my honor at Harrenhal. Saving her son was the most I could hope to do for my friend." His gaze shifted over to Mira. I will not say do not weep for me, Mira, for I know it shall a long time until I see you again. He took her hand in his. His skin felt ice cold. Be strong for me, for our people, my little winter lily. Howland's eyelids drifted closed and his whole body went limp. Mira couldn't help herself. She was never given the chance to grieve for Joan when he was left to die. She fell onto her father's body and couldn't hold back her tears or her moans of sadness. She was alone now, the last of the Reeds.